The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp fields bend spacetime in predictable ways. Subspace carries communications across light years through mathematically precise frequencies. Even the most exotic phenomena, temporal anomalies, spatial rifts, quantum singularities, follow rules that sensors can detect and science can eventually explain. But what happens when something punches through from a reality where different laws govern existence? When a ship materializes that shouldn't exist, powered by physics that have no place in our cosmos? The collision happened in the space between spaces, where hyperspace should never have touched subspace. One moment, Din Djarin was calculating the jump to the next system, Grogu secured in his seat beside him, the child's large eyes reflecting the blue tunnel of hyperspace streaming past. The next moment, reality screamed. The ship lurched violently as something invisible grabbed it, wrenched it sideways through dimensions that had no name. Alarms shrieked. The viewport shattered into fractal patterns of impossible colors. Grogu cried out, not in fear, but in pain, as if something fundamental had been torn away from him. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong. Din's hands moved across controls that suddenly felt sluggish, unresponsive. The navicomputer displayed error codes in languages that shouldn't exist. Outside the viewport, stars hung in configurations he'd never seen in any chart, any database, any oral history passed down through Mandalorian clans. His HUD flickered, recalibrating to an environment it didn't recognize. "Systems check," he muttered, his voice calm despite the situation. Beskar armor intact. Weapons functional. Life support stable. Hyperdrive offline with catastrophic errors suggesting it was trying to access pathways that simply didn't exist here. Grogu made a questioning sound, reaching toward the viewport with one small hand. Din glanced at the child and saw something that sent cold worry through his chest. Grogu's eyes were unfocused, confused, like he was searching for something he'd always felt but could no longer find. The kid tried to lift a small metal ball with the force, something he'd done 1,000 times, but it barely wobbled before clattering back to the deck. "It's okay, kid," Din said, though he wasn't sure it was. "We'll figure this out." The sensor suite finally finished its recalibration and painted a picture that made no sense. They were in orbit around a planet. No, wait, near a nebula. No, both. The readings kept shifting as if the ship's computers were arguing with reality about what they were actually seeing. What was clear, they weren't alone. Multiple contacts closing fast. Large vessels, heavily armed, moving with coordinated precision. Din's hand moved to the weapons console. Whatever this place was, some things remained universal. When unknown ships approached, you prepared for the worst. The comm system crackled with a hail in a language his translator struggled to parse before suddenly snapping into focus. "Unknown vessel, this is the Federation Starship Enterprise. You have entered Federation space near the Romulan neutral zone. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. We are reading unusual energy signatures from your vessel and are prepared to render assistance if needed." Federation. Romulan. Terms that meant nothing to him. Din studied the lead ship on his sensors, massive, saucer-shaped primary hull connected to an engineering section, 2 nacelles extending outward. Nothing like any ship design he'd ever encountered. Not Imperial, not New Republic, not even matching the exotic designs of the Outer Rim's most isolated systems. "This is Din Djarin," he responded carefully, one hand still resting on the weapon controls. "We had a malfunction. Where are we?" A pause. Then a different voice, older, measured, with an accent that suggested authority earned through experience. "I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise. You're approximately 15 light-years from the Romulan neutral zone, in what we call the Caleb sector. Our sensors indicate your vessel uses propulsion technology we don't recognize. Your ship's energy signature is unlike anything in our databases. Mr. Djarin, I don't wish to alarm you, but we need to understand what we're dealing with. Are you willing to discuss this face to face? Din looked at Grogu. The child had curled into his seat, eyes half closed, clearly exhausted by whatever had happened during their transit. Every instinct Din had told him not to trust these people, not to board their ship, not to let anyone get close to the kid. But his ship was damaged, the hyperdrive was useless, and he had no idea where they were or how to get home. I'll meet with you, Din said finally. But I'm armed, and I stay armed. This is non-negotiable. Another pause. Mr. Djarin, Starfleet regulations. I don't know what Starfleet is, Din interrupted, his voice flat. Where I come from, a Mandalorian doesn't surrender his weapons. Ever. You want to talk, we talk on my terms, or I take my chances out here. He could almost feel the debate happening on the other end. Finally, Picard spoke again, and Din heard the decision of someone choosing pragmatism over protocol. Very well. We'll transport you to a secure area where we can speak. But understand, Mr. Djarin, if you threaten my crew, this conversation ends immediately. Understood, Din replied. One more thing. The child comes with me. He doesn't leave my sight. Of course, Picard said, and Din detected genuine warmth in those two words. We would never separate a parent from their child. Stand by for transport. Din lifted Grogu into his arms. The kid nuzzled against his Beskar chest plate, seeking comfort. Stay close, Din whispered. Don't use your abilities unless I tell you. We don't know these people yet. Grogu cooed softly in acknowledgement. The air shimmered around them, a sensation completely unlike any technology Din knew. For a moment, he felt himself dissolve into light and energy, every molecule of his being converted into a pattern, a stream of information. His warrior instincts screamed violation, but before panic could fully form, he was whole again, standing in a different space entirely. The room was circular, with a raised platform in the center. Consoles lined the walls, displaying information in scripts he couldn't read. The lighting was even, clinical, completely unlike the harsh contrasts of Imperial facilities or the warm chaos of Outer Rim stations. And standing before him, flanked by officers in matching uniforms, was a bald man with eyes that suggested he'd seen more than his share of the impossible. Welcome aboard the Enterprise, Mr. Djarin, Captain Picard said, studying the armored figure before him with barely concealed fascination. Now, perhaps you can explain how you came to be in our space, and what exactly that child is. Din's hand didn't move toward his blaster, but his stance shifted slightly, protectively. Grogu's large eyes peered out from his arms, taking in the strange new world with curious innocence. That, Din said quietly, is a very long story. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The room Captain Picard designated for their conversation was smaller than the transport chamber, a briefing room with a long table, chairs positioned with diplomatic precision, and a viewport showing the endless star field beyond. Din remained standing despite Picard's gesture toward the seats. Mandalorians didn't relax in unfamiliar territory, didn't lower their guard until threats were assessed and escape routes confirmed. His HUD was already mapping the room, calculating sight lines, cataloging potential weapons among the innocuous-looking panels and displays. Picard took his own seat with deliberate calm, projecting non-aggression through body language. Beside him sat 3 officers. A Klingon whose ridged forehead and warrior bearing suggested a culture Din might actually understand, an android whose golden skin and precise movements marked him as clearly artificial yet eerily lifelike, and a woman in a blue medical uniform whose eyes kept drifting to Grogu with professional concern. You said this would be a long story, Picard began, his voice carrying the patience of someone accustomed to first contact scenarios. We have time, Mr. Djarin. But perhaps we might start with the basics. Our sensors detected a massive spatial distortion approximately 47 minutes ago, a rupture in subspace unlike anything in our records. Your ship appeared at the epicenter. Can you tell us what happened? Din shifted Grogu slightly in his arms. The child was watching the android with fascination, reaching out with one small hand as if trying to touch something invisible. We were traveling through hyperspace, Din said. Standard jump between systems. Then something caught us, pulled us sideways. The ship's computer says the hyperdrive is trying to access routes that don't exist here. Hyperspace, the android repeated, his head tilting with precise curiosity. That term does not appear in any of our databases in the context of faster-than-light travel. We utilize warp drive, which functions by distorting the space-time continuum through controlled matter-antimatter reactions. You are suggesting an entirely different mechanism? I don't know what warp drive is, Din replied. Hyperspace it's another dimension. Ships enter it, travel through it, exit at their destination. Every ship I've ever known uses it. The android's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of what might have been excitement. Fascinating. An alternate method of FTL travel suggesting an entirely different understanding of dimensional physics. Captain, the implications. Indeed, Mr. Data? Picard interrupted gently. But first things first. He turned his attention back to Din. You said you were traveling between systems? Systems in which galaxy, Mr. Djarin? The question hung in the air. Din felt the weight of it, the impossibility it suggested. I don't have coordinates that would mean anything to you, he said carefully. But if your computers can't find any reference to hyperspace, and you've never seen a ship like mine, he trailed off, the conclusion forcing itself into words he didn't want to speak. We're not just far from home. We're somewhere else entirely. A dimensional traveler, the Klingon said, his voice a deep rumble that carried both respect and suspicion. From a reality with different physical laws. This explains why our sensors cannot properly analyze your vessel's propulsion system. Lieutenant Worf is correct, Picard said. We've encountered dimensional phenomena before, beings and vessels from alternate realities where events unfolded differently than in our own. But you're suggesting something more profound. Not an alternate timeline, but an entirely separate universe with fundamentally different physics. Din said nothing. What was there to say? He'd been in impossible situations before. Trapped in Imperial facilities, stranded on hostile worlds, hunted by bounty syndicates across multiple systems. But those were problems you could fight or fly your way out of. This was something else. This was being cut off from everything he knew, every star he'd navigated by, every safe harbor and contact and supplier. Cut off from the Mandalorians, from the New Republic, from any chance of getting Grogu to the Jedi who could properly train him. If Jedi even existed here. Grogu made a soft sound, and Din realized he'd tensed. The kid could feel his stress, his worry. Din forced himself to breathe evenly, to project calm even if he didn't feel it. The child, he said, changing the subject deliberately. You wanted to know what he is. Dr. Crusher leaned forward slightly, her professional interest evident. Our sensors detected unusual readings when we scanned your ship. Synaptic activity in the child's brain is extraordinary, patterns we've never encountered in any known species. And there's something else, an energy signature we can't quite quantify. It's almost as if... She hesitated, choosing words carefully. As if he's generating a field that our instruments interpret as both biological and something more. He has abilities, Din said, his voice carrying a warning edge. He can move things without touching them. Heal injuries. Sense danger before it happens. Where we come from, beings like him are called force-sensitive. They can manipulate an energy field that binds the galaxy together. Data's eyes widened again. An energy field that binds your galaxy together. You're describing something that sounds like a fundamental force of nature, similar to gravity or electromagnetism, but with conscious accessibility. Remarkable. In our universe, we have documented various forms of psionic ability, telepathy, telekinesis, precognition, but never as manifestations of a single unified field. The force doesn't work the same way here, Din admitted, remembering how Grogu had struggled with the metal ball. He's weaker than he should be. Like whatever he was connected to got cut when we crossed over. Not cut. Data corrected thoughtfully. Translated. If his abilities are indeed psionic in nature, they would function differently in our dimensional framework. Telepathic species in our galaxy often manipulate subspace frequencies to communicate. Perhaps the child is simply adjusting to a new, carrier wave, if you will. Grogu chose that moment to demonstrate. His eyes focused on a PDD resting on the table. One of the tablet devices these people seemed to use for everything. The device trembled, rose slightly, wavered in the air for perhaps 3 seconds before clattering back down. Grogu's ears drooped with exhaustion from the effort. The room went very quiet. "How old is he?" Dr. Crusher asked, her voice soft with wonder. "Around 50 years," Din said. "His species ages slowly. He's still a child by their standards." Worf shifted in his seat, his warrior instincts clearly engaged. "A child with the power to move objects with his mind. Mr. Djarin, you must understand how this appears to us. Such abilities in the wrong hands. He's not a weapon." Din cut in, his voice hard as Beskar. "And he's not going into anyone's hands. I've spent the last 2 years keeping him safe from people who wanted to use him, experiment on him, turn him into something he's not. That doesn't change just because we're in a different universe." "No one is suggesting we take the child," Picard said firmly, shooting Worf a look that spoke of later discussions. "But you must understand our concern, Mr. Djarin. We've just witnessed a spatial phenomenon that suggests either unprecedented technology or unprecedented natural ability. A child appears who can manipulate matter with his mind. And you, an armed warrior who refuses to even show us his face, claim to be his protector. From our perspective, we need to establish trust before we can offer meaningful assistance." "Trust works both ways, Captain," Din replied. "I don't know you. I don't know your laws, your factions, your enemies. Where I come from, showing someone your face means you trust them with your life. A Mandalorian earns that trust or doesn't see what's under the helmet. That's the creed. That's the way. A warrior culture with strict codes of honor," Worf observed, and Din heard something like approval in his tone. "I can respect that. Among my people, the Klingon, honor is everything. A warrior who breaks his word dishonors his house and his ancestors." Din studied the Klingon. First person in this room who seemed to understand. "Then you understand why I can't just surrender my weapons and pretend we're all friends." "Not yet." Picard folded his hands on the table, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Djarin, I'm going to be direct with you. The area where you appeared is politically sensitive. We're near the Romulan neutral zone, a border region between the Federation and the Romulan Star Empire. The Romulans are, not our enemies precisely, but neither are they our friends. They monitor this region constantly. They certainly detected the same spatial anomaly we did. And if they intercepted our sensor readings, they know about the child." Din finished. "And they'll want him." "Most likely," Picard admitted. "The Romulans value intelligence above all else. A being with psionic abilities from an unknown dimension would represent both a potential asset and a potential threat. They would seek to understand him, to determine if he could be used or if he needed to be eliminated." Din's hand moved to his blaster, not drawing it, just resting on the grip. "Habit. Threat assessment. Then we need to leave this area. My ship is damaged but functional. Point me toward neutral space, and we'll be gone." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Data said. "Our analysis of your vessel suggests its primary propulsion system is fundamentally incompatible with our space-time. The hyperdrive, as you call it, requires access to a dimensional framework that does not exist in our reality. Without it, your ship is limited to sublight speeds that would take decades to reach even the nearest system." Decades. The word hit harder than a blaster bolt. Din looked down at Grogu, who gazed back up at him with complete trust, complete faith that Din would fix this. Would find a way home. Would keep him safe. There must be something, Din said, and hated hearing the edge of desperation in his voice. Your computers, your scientists, someone must understand dimensional travel. You said you've encountered it before? We have, Picard acknowledged. But I won't mislead you with false hope, Mr. Djarin. Dimensional rifts are among the most unpredictable and dangerous phenomena in known space. Some have been naturally occurring, others artificially generated. In every case, they've been temporary and unrepeatable. Finding a way to return you to your home universe would require understanding the exact conditions that brought you here and recreating them precisely. That could take months, years, or it might prove impossible. The briefing room fell silent except for the ambient hum of the Enterprise's systems. Din felt Grogu's small hand grip his glove, the child's way of offering comfort even though he probably didn't fully understand what was being said. So what do you suggest? Din asked finally. Picard met his gaze with the kind of honesty Din recognized from leaders who actually gave a damn about the people under their command. For now, you remain aboard the Enterprise. We'll assign you quarters, provide whatever supplies you need. Our crew will analyze your ship thoroughly, with your permission, to understand its technology, and see if there's any way to make your hyperdrive functional here. In the meantime, you and the child will be safe. You have my word on that. Your word, Din repeated. And what does that mean in this universe, Captain? What happens when these Romulans show up? Or whoever else might want Grogu? Do we become prisoners for our own protection? You become guests, Picard said. Free to move about the ship, free to speak with anyone, free to leave if you choose, though I would strongly advise against that given the circumstances. The Federation was founded on principles of mutual cooperation and respect for all sentient life. We don't imprison people for being different or for possessing abilities we don't understand. We seek to understand, to learn, to find common ground. Din wanted to believe him. The words sounded good. But he'd heard good words before from people who turned out to want Grogu for experiments, for cloning, for turning his blood into an army of force-sensitive soldiers. I need to think, Din said. Alone. Of course. Picard rose smoothly. Dr. Crusher will show you to guest quarters. Take whatever time you need. When you're ready to talk further, simply ask the computer to contact me. As they filed out, Worf lingered for a moment. Mr. Djarin, the Klingon said quietly. I do not know your culture, but I recognize a warrior when I see one. Captain Picard is a man of honor. If he gives his word, he keeps it. That is something you can trust. Din nodded fractionally. Thank you. When they were gone in Dr. Crusher was leading him through corridors that hummed with technology he didn't understand. Din whispered to Grogu. We're going to be okay, kid. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. This is the way. Grogu cooed softly, his ears perking up slightly. And despite everything, despite being lost in an alien universe with no way home and unknown enemies already learning of their existence, Din Djarin held on to the one thing that had gotten him through everything else. The way. The creed. And the absolute certainty that he would protect this child, no matter what universe they were in. The guest quarters were larger than Din expected. A main living area with seating arranged around a low table, a sleeping alcove separated by a partition, and a viewport showing the star field beyond. Everything was clean, functional, designed with the kind of efficiency that suggested these people had refined hospitality to a science. Dr. Crusher had explained the basics. Replicator for food and supplies, comm panel to contact the bridge, refresher facilities that worked on principles he didn't quite grasp but seemed hygienic enough. If you need anything medical attention for yourself or the child, don't hesitate to contact me, Dr. Crusher had said at the door, her eyes lingering on Grogu with the concern of someone who genuinely cared about vulnerable beings. I'd like to run some non-invasive scans tomorrow, just to make sure he's adjusting well to the transition. Only if you're comfortable with that, of course. Din had agreed, mostly because Grogu did seem more tired than usual, his connection to whatever the Force had become here clearly draining him. After she left, He'd spent 20 minutes examining every centimeter of the quarters, looking for surveillance devices, hidden weapons, emergency exits. His HUD detected standard sensor equipment, likely monitoring life signs and environmental conditions, but nothing that screamed covert intelligence gathering. Finally, he'd allowed himself to remove his helmet. The air tasted recycled but clean, temperature controlled to precise comfort. Din set the helmet on the table where he could grab it instantly if needed, then looked down at Grogu. The child was watching him with those enormous eyes, ears drooping with exhaustion but still alert enough to be curious about their new surroundings. "Hungry?" Din asked. Grogu cooed affirmatively. Din approached the device Dr. Crusher had called a replicator, a panel set into the wall with a recessed alcove below it. She demonstrated it briefly. State what you want, it appears. Matter synthesis or some kind of advanced 3D printing, he wasn't sure which. Technology far beyond anything in his galaxy except maybe the most exotic Imperial research facilities. "Bone broth," he said, remembering how Grogu had enjoyed that on Navarro. "Child-sized portion, warm." The machine hummed. Light danced in the alcove, and when it faded, a small bowl sat there steaming gently. Din retrieved it cautiously, sniffed it, dipped a finger in to test the temperature. It was perfect. Somehow the machine had known exactly what child-sized and warm meant, had created something from nothing that smelled and looked exactly like bone broth. He set it on the table, and Grogu attacked it with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't eaten since before their dimensional mishap. Din watched him slurp and splash, making his usual mess, and felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Whatever else was wrong, the kid was safe, fed, and protected. That was what mattered. Din ordered something for himself. Protein, cooked simple, and got what appeared to be some kind of poultry with vegetables. It tasted adequate. Not as good as a real meal, but not bad for something materialized from energy. He ate standing, watching the viewport, thinking. They were trapped here. No hyperdrive meant no way home, no way to reach the New Republic, no way to find the Jedi who could properly train Grogu. Worse, they'd already attracted attention from hostile factions. These Romulans, whoever they were, would be coming. And probably not just them. In Din's experience, powerful children attracted predators the way blood attracted sand panthers. But Captain Picard seemed genuine. The android Data had shown honest scientific curiosity rather than the cold calculation Din associated with droids. Even the Klingon, despite his obvious warrior nature, had spoken of honor. Maybe there were good people here. Maybe the Federation Picard described was real and not just propaganda. Or maybe Din was desperate enough to want to believe it. Grogu finished his broth and reached up with both hands, making his pick-me-up gesture. Din lifted him, and the child immediately snuggled against his chest, eyes already closing. The dimensional crossing, the weakening of his abilities, the stress of new surroundings, it had exhausted him. Din carried him to the sleeping alcove and settled into the bed with Grogu on his chest, the way they'd slept countless times on the Razor Crest and its successor. He kept his armor on except for the helmet, old habits, the need to be ready for anything. His hand rested on the blaster at his hip. As Grogu's breathing deepened into sleep, Din stared at the ceiling and tried to formulate a plan. First priority, understand this universe. Its factions, its threats, its rules. Second, find out if there was any possibility of going home. Third, if there wasn't, figure out how to survive here long enough to get Grogu somewhere safe where he could grow up protected. The way had always been clear before. Protect the child. Honor the creed. Trust in Mandalorian strength and Mandalorian brotherhood. But there were no Mandalorians here. No covert to return to, no armorer to guide him, no clan to call on when things got desperate. Just him, Grogu, and a ship full of strangers who followed principles he didn't understand. Din closed his eyes, listening to Grogu's soft breathing, and tried to find sleep despite every instinct telling him to stay alert. He woke 6 hours later to the sound of Grogu whimpering. Din was fully alert instantly, hand on his blaster, scanning the room for threats. Nothing. The door was sealed. The viewport showed the same star field. But Grogu was curled in a tight ball, making distressed sounds, his small face scrunched in discomfort. "Hey, kid," Din said softly, touching Grogu's forehead. "What's wrong?" Grogu's eyes opened, unfocused and confused. He reached out with both hands, making grasping motions at empty air, and Din realized what was happening. The child was trying to feel the Force, to connect with that energy field that had been his constant companion since birth. And finding nothing. Or worse, finding something completely alien that didn't respond the way it should. "I know," Din murmured, pulling Grogu close. "It's different here. But you'll adapt. You're strong. You've survived worse than this." Had he, though? Grogu had been hunted, imprisoned, nearly killed. But he'd always had the Force. Always had that connection to something larger than himself. Now he was cut off, or at least severed from the familiar patterns, forced to navigate a universe where the fundamental rules had changed. Din carried Grogu to the viewport, letting him look out at the stars. "See those?" he said, pointing. "Different constellations. Different galaxy, maybe different universe. But they're still stars. Still burning, still giving light. The fundamentals don't change, kid. We're still us. We'll figure out how to make this work." Grogu pressed one small hand against the transparent aluminum, staring out with an expression that looked far too old for a child's face. After a moment, he turned and looked up at Din, cooing questioningly. "Yeah," Din said. "We're really here. This is real." A chime sounded from the door, a polite alert that someone was requesting entry. Din's hand moved to his blaster as he grabbed his helmet with the other hand, settling it over his head, activating the seals. "Who is it?" he called. "Dr. Beverly Crusher," came the muffled reply. "I'm sorry to disturb you so early, but we've detected some concerning readings from the child's quarters. Elevated stress indicators. I wanted to make sure he's all right." Din hesitated, then moved to the door, keeping Grogu behind him as he opened it. Dr. Crusher stood in the corridor, a medical tricorder in her hands, her expression genuinely concerned rather than threatening. "He woke up distressed," Din said. "His abilities aren't working properly here. I think it's affecting him psychologically. May I?" Dr. Crusher gestured with the tricorder. When Din nodded, she stepped inside and ran the device over Grogu from a respectful distance, studying the readings. Her frown deepened. "His neural activity is extremely elevated in the psionic centers, the parts of the brain associated with telepathy and telekinesis in other species. But the energy patterns are chaotic, like he's trying to access pathways that aren't there anymore. Or aren't where he expects them to be. Can you help him?" Din asked, and hated the vulnerability in his voice. "Possibly," Dr. Crusher said. "We have experience with psionic species, Vulcans, Betas, several others. They all interact with subspace in slightly different ways. If I could run some comparative scans, maybe we can help him adapt his abilities to work within our dimensional framework instead of fighting against it." Din studied her through his helmet's HUD, analyzing her body language, her tone, her micro-expressions. She seemed genuine. More than that, she seemed like someone who actually cared about helping rather than exploiting. But he'd been wrong about people before. "What kind of scans?" he asked carefully. "Non-invasive neural imaging," she explained. "We map his brain activity while he attempts to use his abilities, compare it to known psionic patterns in our database, see if we can identify what's different and help him compensate. It would take maybe an hour, completely painless. He'd be conscious and with you the entire time." Grogu was watching Dr. Crusher with interest now, his ears perked forward. The child had good instincts about people. He'd trusted Din from the beginning, had known which strangers were safe and which weren't. And he didn't seem afraid of her. "All right," Din decided. "But I stay with him every second." "Of course." Dr. Crusher smiled warmly at Grogu. Shall we head to sickbay? I can replicate something for him to eat on the way if he's hungry. They walked through corridors that were beginning to show signs of life as the Enterprise's crew started their day's shift. People in those color-coded uniforms, gold, red, blue, moving with purpose, some nodding politely to Dr. Crusher, most trying not to stare at the armored Mandalorian carrying a strange child. Din noted the security personnel stationed at key intersections, the casual confidence of people who believed their ship was safe, the complete absence of visible weapons among the crew. No one armed except security. No one armored except him. These people lived in a bubble of assumed safety that would get them killed in his galaxy. Sickbay was a revelation, medical technology that made even the best New Republic facilities look primitive. Biobeds with full-body scanners, displays showing real-time biological data in formats Din's HUD could barely translate, equipment whose purpose he couldn't even guess. Dr. Crusher guided them to one of the beds, setting it to child-sized proportions with a command Din didn't catch. "Okay, Grogu," she said gently, having learned the child's name from Din during their walk. "I'm going to have you lie down here, and this scanner," she indicated a curved arm that descended from the ceiling, "is going to take pictures of your brain. It won't hurt, won't even touch you. Just pictures. Can you do that for me?" Grogu looked at Din, who nodded. The child climbed onto the biobed, still holding Din's glove, unwilling to break contact completely. "That's perfect," Dr. Crusher said. "Now, while the scanner is working, I want you to try using your abilities. Try to lift something, maybe that medical instrument there." She pointed to a small device on a nearby tray. Grogu focused, his eyes narrowing with concentration. The device trembled, rose perhaps half an inch, then clattered back down. The child's ears drooped with frustration and exhaustion. Dr. Crusher was studying her displays with fascination. "Remarkable," she breathed. "I'm seeing psionic activity, but it's attempting to interface with subspace frequencies that our species don't typically access. It's like, imagine trying to tune a radio to a frequency that doesn't exist in your region. The signal is there, but the carrier wave is wrong. Can you fix it?" Din asked. "Fix might not be the right word," she said thoughtfully. "But we might be able to help him learn to tune to the frequencies that do exist here." Data mentioned that psionic abilities in our universe often work through subspace manipulation. If Grogu can learn to access those same frequencies. She trailed off, clearly thinking. "I'd like to bring in someone who might be able to help. Counselor Deanna Troi, she's half-Bedized, with natural telepathic and empathic abilities. She might be able to guide Grogu, show him how psionic abilities work in our reality." Din hesitated. More people meant more risk, more chances for someone to realize just how valuable Grogu might be. But it also meant more chances to help the kid adapt, to give him back some of what he'd lost. "All right," he said. "But the same rules apply. I stay with him. Always." Dr. Crusher tapped her comm badge, a small device on her chest that apparently functioned as a communicator. Crusher to Troi. "Deanna, could you come to sickbay? I have a situation you might be able to help with." A moment later, a woman's voice replied. "On my way, Beverly." While they waited, Grogu continued attempting to manipulate objects, each effort leaving him more exhausted but also, Din noticed with careful attention, slightly more successful. The third time, the device rose almost 2 inches. The fourth time, it hovered for nearly 5 seconds before dropping. "He's adapting already," Dr. Crusher observed. "Children's brains are remarkably plastic. He's learning unconsciously, trial and error, figuring out which neural pathways work in this dimensional framework." The sickbay doors opened, and a woman in a blue uniform entered, dark hair, striking eyes, an air of calm empathy that seemed to precede her like a wave. She took one look at Grogu and stopped, her expression shifting to wonder. "Oh my," she said softly. "I can feel him. Such innocence, such confusion, he's trying so hard to understand where he is." She approached slowly, her movements non-threatening, her eyes on Grogu rather than Din. "Hello, little one. My name is Deanna. You're trying to reach out, aren't you? Trying to feel the connections you used to have?" Grogu cooed, his ears perking forward with interest. He could sense something from her. Din could see it in the way the child tilted his head, the way his eyes widened slightly. Counselor Troy smiled. "Yes, I'm like you. Different, but similar. In my culture, we call it empathy, the ability to feel what others feel. But it's more than that. We touch minds, reach through subspace itself to connect with other consciousness. Would you like me to show you?" She extended her hand, not touching Grogu but holding it near him, and closed her eyes. Grogu's eyes widened further, and then Din felt it. Not directly, but through Grogu's reaction. The child gasped, his whole body relaxing as if something he'd been desperately missing had suddenly been restored. Not the Force, not exactly, but something. A connection. A sense that he wasn't alone in his own head anymore. "There you are," Troy whispered. "Yes, I feel you too. You're so far from home, aren't you? So lost. But you're not alone. You have your protector, and now you have friends who understand." 3 days passed aboard the Enterprise, and Din Djarin learned that patience was a weapon these people wielded as skillfully as any blaster. No one demanded answers. No one pressured him to make decisions. Captain Picard checked in daily with polite inquiries about their comfort and needs, but never pushed beyond what Din was willing to share. Data spent hours analyzing Din's ship, asking permission for every scan, every system access, explaining his findings in detail even when Din barely understood half the technical terminology. Counselor Troy worked with Grogu twice a day, teaching him to sense subspace frequencies, to reach through them the way Betazods did, to translate his Force abilities into something this universe could accommodate. And Grogu was improving. Slowly, but visibly. Yesterday he managed to levitate a toy for nearly a minute. This morning he'd sensed Din's mood from across their quarters, not quite telepathy, but something close. The exhaustion was lessening as the child's brain rewired itself, adapted to new rules, found new pathways to express abilities that had once been instinctive. Din had begun to relax. Just slightly. Just enough to explore the ship without his hand constantly resting on his blaster. Just enough to accept Dr. Crusher's invitation to bring Grogu to 10 forward, a lounge area where off-duty crew gathered, so the child could see other children playing. That was his first mistake. He realized it the moment they entered 10 forward and every conversation stopped. Not with fear, but with curiosity. Intense, hungry curiosity. A Ferengi bartender with grotesquely large ears studied them with calculating eyes. A group of civilians whispered behind their hands. And in the far corner, a woman Din's instincts immediately tagged as dangerous, human-looking but with an edge to her posture that screamed intelligence operative, watched them with the kind of attention that preceded very bad things. Din steered Grogu to a table near the viewport, positioning himself so he could see the entire room, every entrance, every potential threat. He ordered something sweet for Grogu from the replicator. The child had developed a taste for a dessert called ice cream, and tried to ignore the stares. "Quite the sensation you've caused," a voice said from behind him. Din's hand moved to his blaster before he consciously registered the threat. He turned to find the Ferengi bartender. Guinan, her name tag red, standing there with what might have been an amused smile on her unusual face. "People are talking," she continued, settling into a chair without invitation. "A warrior from another universe. A child with psionic abilities unlike anything in Federation databases. You're the most interesting thing to happen on this ship since Q's last visit, and that's saying something." "I'm not interested in being interesting," Din said flatly. "No, I don't imagine you are," Guinan replied, her dark eyes studying him with an intensity that made his skin crawl beneath the armor. "You're interested in protecting that child. In finding a way home. In surviving long enough to figure out what comes next." She paused. "But interesting isn't something you get to choose, Mr. Djarin. It's something that happens to you. And once people find you interesting, they don't stop just because you want them to. Is there a point to this conversation? Din asked, his tone colder now. Guinan's expression softened slightly. Just a friendly warning. I've been around a long time, longer than you might guess. I've seen what happens when powerful beings appear in spaces they don't belong. Some people will want to help you. Some will want to use you. And some will want to eliminate you before you become a problem they can't solve. The trick is figuring out which is which before it's too late. Before Din could respond, the ship shuddered. Not violently, but enough to rattle glasses on tables, to make the view screen flicker momentarily. Red alert klaxons began blaring, and Picard's voice came over the intercom. All hands to stations. Unknown vessels decloaking off the port bow. Prepare for possible hostile contact. Din was moving before the announcement finished, scooping Grogu into his arms, heading for the exit. But the doors sealed before he reached them. Emergency lockdown protocol, he realized. They were trapped in 10 forward with 24 civilians, and no immediate way to reach their quarters or his ship. Computer, unseal these doors, Din demanded. Unable to comply, the synthetic voice responded. Emergency protocols in effect. All non-essential personnel are to remain in secure areas until the alert is cancelled. Through the viewport, Din could see them now. 3 ships, sleek and predatory, painted in dark greens that seemed to drink the starlight. They were smaller than the Enterprise but moved with the precision of hunters, flanking the Federation vessel in a pattern that spoke of coordinated tactics and hostile intent. Romulans, someone whispered behind him, the word carrying fear and recognition. Din's jaw clenched inside his helmet. The Romulans. The faction Picard had warned about, the ones who would see Grogu as an asset or a threat. And they'd waited exactly long enough for Din to let his guard down, to move away from his ship and his full arsenal, to be vulnerable in a room full of potential hostages. Professional. Calculated. Exactly how Din would have planned it. His helmet's external speakers crackled to life as someone hailed the Enterprise. The voice that followed was smooth, cultured, dripping with false courtesy. USS Enterprise, this is Commander Tomalak of the Romulan warbird Valdor. We have detected the presence of unknown life signs aboard your vessel, specifically, a being with psionic capabilities far exceeding normal parameters. The Romulan Star Empire has a vested interest in understanding this anomaly. We request immediate transfer of the individuals in question for diplomatic evaluation. Through the viewport, Din watched as the Enterprise's shield snapped into place, a shimmer of energy briefly visible before fading. Picard's response came measured but firm. They are not subjects for diplomatic evaluation or any other form of examination without their explicit consent. Captain Picard? Tomalak replied, his tone hardening. You are in proximity to the neutral zone. Our sensors indicate these life signs originated from a spatial rupture of unprecedented magnitude. This represents a potential threat to interstellar security. Surely you understand the Romulan Empire cannot simply ignore such a development so close to our borders. Din was already planning. The doors were sealed, but there were always alternatives. Service conduits, emergency hatches, access points designed for maintenance. His HUD was mapping the room, highlighting possibilities, calculating routes back to the docking bay where his ship waited. Guinan appeared at his elbow again. There's a maintenance hatch behind the bar, she said quietly. Leads to a Jeffries tube that can get you to Deck 12. From there you can reach your ship. I'm guessing that's what you're thinking. Din stared at her. Why would you help me? Because Picard will try to handle this diplomatically. And diplomacy with Romulans is like playing chess with someone who's already stolen half your pieces. Guinan replied. You need to be ready to run if this goes badly. That child is too valuable to let them have him. She was right. Din knew it with the certainty born from years of bounty hunting, of understanding how predators thought. The Romulans weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take. The diplomatic language was just theater, giving them time to position their ships, to lock transporters, to prepare for the moment they decided talking was over. "Show me the hatch," Din said. Guinan led him behind the bar, pointing to a panel in the floor. "Jeffrey's tubes are narrow, but you should fit with the armor. The child definitely will. Turn left at the first junction, follow the conduit to the emergency bulkhead, go through and down 2 levels. Your docking bay should be accessible from there." Din nodded, already working the panel open. "Thank you?" "Don't thank me yet," Guinan said. "Just keep that child safe. He's important. More important than either of you realize." Before Din could ask what she meant, the ship shuddered again, harder this time. Through the viewport, he saw weapons fire a lance from one of the Romulan vessels, impacting the Enterprise's shields in cascades of green energy. The lights in 10 forward flickered, and somewhere in the distance, alarms began screaming. Tomalak's voice came through again, all pretense of courtesy gone. "Captain Picard, that was a warning shot. You will lower your shields and prepare for transport of the specified individuals, or we will disable your ship and take them by force. You have 30 seconds to comply." Picard's response was immediate and hard as duranium. "All hands, battle stations. Red alert. Worf, charge weapons. Prepare to return fire." The people in 10 forward were panicking now, moving away from the viewports, huddling in corners, looking to Din with expressions that ranged from fear to accusation. Like this was his fault. Like he'd asked to be here, to bring danger to their safe little bubble. "Go," Guinan hissed. "Now, before the shooting really starts." Din dropped through the hatch with Grogu clutched to his chest, pulling the panel closed behind him. The Jeffries tube was exactly as narrow as promised, barely enough room for his armored shoulders, forcing him to move in an awkward crouch. But he'd trained in tighter spaces. He'd escaped from Imperial facilities through ventilation ducts half this size. The ship rocked as weapons fire increased, and through the metal walls Din could hear the bass rumble of the Enterprise's phaser arrays returning fire. Grogu whimpered, his ears flat against his head, sensing the danger even if he didn't fully understand it. "Stay quiet, kid," Din whispered. "We're getting to the ship. Then we're getting out of here." He moved as fast as the confined space allowed, following Guinan's directions, his HUD painting navigation markers over his vision. Left at the junction. Straight through 2 sections. Down through the vertical access shaft. Harder with Grogu, but manageable if he used his jetpack for controlled descent rather than free fall. He was halfway down the shaft when he heard voices above him. Federation voices, shouting coordinates, talking about intruders and transporter signatures. The Romulans weren't just shooting. They were boarding. Din increased his pace, taking risks with the descent that would have been suicidal without armor. He hit the lower level hard, rolled to absorb impact, came up running. The corridor here was utilitarian, no viewports, just harsh lighting and conduits running along the ceiling. His HUD said the docking bay was 60 meters ahead. He made it 30 before the Romulans appeared. There were 5 of them, materialized from transporter beams in a shimmer of green light. They wore armor similar to his but lighter, built for speed rather than pure protection. They carried weapons that looked like more elegant versions of blasters, disruptors, his database translated. And they were positioned perfectly to cut him off from the docking bay. The lead Romulan, a woman with sharp features and cold eyes, raised her weapon. "Din Djarin," she said, pronouncing his name correctly, which meant they'd done their research. "Surrender the child. This does not have to be violent." Din's response was to draw his blaster and fire. The corridor erupted into chaos. Disruptor fire met blaster bolts in midair, energy splashing against walls and ceiling. Din dove behind a support column, shielding Grogu with his body, returning fire with practiced precision. He caught one Romulan in the shoulder, saw her spin and fall. Adjusted his aim, took out another with a shot to the leg. But there were still 3, and they were spreading out, flanking him. Professional soldiers, not amateurs. One was already circling around, trying to get a clean shot at his back. Din triggered his jetpack, rocketing upward and backward, twisting in midair to maintain his firing angle. He took out the flanker with a mid-flight shot, landed behind a different column closer to the docking bay entrance. 20 meters now. If he could just... Pain exploded across his back as a disruptor blast caught him between the shoulder blades. The Beskar held. The armor was specifically designed to resist energy weapons, but the impact still drove him forward, made him stumble. Grogu cried out, and Din felt the child's fear spike. "I'm okay, kid," he gasped, firing blind behind him to keep the Romulans back. "I'm okay." He wasn't okay. 3 against 1 was manageable. 3 trained soldiers with support incoming, and him trying to protect a child in the middle of a ship he barely knew was suicide. But suicide was still preferable to letting them take Grogu. Din charged forward, firing with one hand while his other arm protected Grogu. He made it to the docking bay entrance, slapped the access panel. The doors began to open, too slowly, far too slowly. And he could hear the Romulans advancing behind him, hear more transporter signatures materializing reinforcements. Then the corridor exploded with different weapons fire. Federation phasers, their distinctive whine cutting through the chaos. Din risked a glance back and saw Worf leading a security team, the Klingon's face split in a battle grin as he laid down suppressing fire. "Get to your ship!" Worf bellowed. "We will hold them!" Din didn't argue. He was through the docking bay doors the instant they opened wide enough, sprinting across the bay floor toward his ship. His ship, battered and functional, and his only way out of this nightmare. He was 10 meters away when the world went white. Transporter beam. Not Federation, Romulan. Grabbing him, pulling him apart into energy and information, preparing to beam him somewhere else. Somewhere he absolutely could not go while holding Grogu. Din did the only thing he could think of. He triggered every electronic countermeasure his armor had, flooding the immediate area with electromagnetic interference. The transporter beam stuttered, flickered, fought to maintain lock. For 3 seconds he existed in quantum superposition, either fully here nor fully there. Then the beam failed, and he crashed back into reality hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. But he was still in the docking bay. Still holding Grogu. Still alive. He staggered the last few meters to his ship, hit the ramp release, practically fell inside. The ship's systems were already powering up. He'd left them on standby, another old habit that had just saved their lives. He strapped Grogu into his seat, threw himself into the pilot's chair, and began pre-flight. "Enterprise to Mandalorian vessel." Picard's voice came through the calm. "Mr. Djarin, what are your intentions?" "Getting out of the crossfire," Din replied, his hands flying over controls. "I won't bring this fight to your ship, Captain. But I won't let them have him either." A pause. Then, "Understood. I'm having the bay doors opened. Mr. Djarin. I'm sorry. We tried to protect you." "I know," Din said, and meant it. "Thank you for trying." The bay doors cycled open, revealing the space beyond where the Enterprise and 3 Romulan warbirds were dancing a deadly ballet of weapons fire and tactical maneuvering. Din's ship lifted smoothly, rotated toward the opening, and shot out into the void. Immediately, 2 of the warbirds broke off from the Enterprise, coming after him. Of course they did. He was the target. He'd always been the target. Din punched the sublight engines to maximum, diving toward the nearest stellar body. A small moon that his sensors said was uninhabited. Not fast enough to outrun warbirds, but maybe fast enough to make them work for it. Maybe fast enough to reach the moon's surface where their larger ships couldn't follow as easily. Behind him, Grogu was crying, not from fear now, but from concentration. The child's eyes were closed, his small face scrunched with effort, and Din felt something building in the air. Not the Force, not exactly, but whatever it had become here. One of the pursuing warbirds shuddered. Just slightly. Just enough to throw off its targeting for a moment. Grogu was reaching out, touching their systems through subspace, doing something that shouldn't be possible for a child his age with abilities he'd only just started to understand. "Good job, kid," Din said. But save your strength. We're not out of this yet. The moon loomed larger in the viewport, a gray-brown sphere pocked with craters and ravines. Din angled for the largest canyon system he could see, diving with a recklessness that would have impressed even his old covert. The warbids followed, disruptor fire lancing past his ship, some shots impacting his shields and making the whole vessel shudder. He made it into the canyon with shields at 40% and dropping. The warbids couldn't follow, too large, too unwieldy for this kind of flying. But they didn't need to. They were already deploying fighters, smaller craft that could match his maneuverability. Din swore in Mandoe, brought his ship into a hard turn that pulled 5 gs even with inertial dampeners, and prepared to do what Mandalorians had always done best. Fight until there was nothing left to fight with. The canyon walls blurred past at velocities that would have been suicide without Beskar reflexes and a ship built for combat. Din threw the vessel into a barrel roll, dodging disruptor fire from the Romulan fighters, their sleek craft darting through the narrow passages like predatory birds. 6 of them, his sensors counted. 6 against 1, and his shields were already down to 30%. Grogu whimpered in his seat, small hands gripping the armrests, but the child's eyes remained open now, watching the tactical display with an awareness beyond his years. Din could feel it, that sensation of presence, of Grogu reaching out through whatever subspace frequencies Counselor Troy had taught him to access. The child was trying to help, trying to touch the pursuing ship's systems the way he'd done before. Not yet, kid, Din said, juking left as disruptor fire carved a molten scar across the canyon wall beside them. Wait for my signal. He'd learned something in 3 days aboard the Enterprise, something Data had mentioned almost casually while analyzing his ship. Romulan vessels relied heavily on their cloaking technology. But cloaking created massive power drains, required sophisticated energy redistribution, and left ships vulnerable during the transition between visible and invisible. It was a weakness. Everything had a weakness if you knew where to look. Din activated his ship's targeting computer, primitive by Federation standards, he was sure, but designed for the kind of close-quarters combat that defined his profession. He selected the lead fighter, waited for weapons lock, and fired a barrage from his forward cannons. Not at the fighter itself, but at the canyon wall directly ahead of it. The impact destabilized tons of rock, sending a cascade of debris into the narrow passage. The lead fighter tried to evade, pulled up hard, and clipped its wing on an outcropping. He rolled inverted, fired his dorsal thrusters, and dropped toward the canyon floor while firing upward. Caught one fighter as it tried to climb, tore through its shields and into its power core. The explosion lit the canyon like a miniature sun. 2 left. And his shields were down to 18%. The remaining pilots had figured out they weren't dealing with a panicked target. They coordinated, coming at him from different angles, forcing him to choose which threat to address while the other got a clean shot. Professional tactics. The kind that worked. Din chose neither. Instead, he dove straight down into a crevasse his sensors said was deep enough to hide in, barely. The ship scraped against rock walls on both sides, tearing away minor hull plating, triggering proximity alarms. But he made it through, emerged into a wider underground chamber that opened into something his sensors couldn't quite classify. Artificial. The chamber was artificial. Walls too smooth, too regular. Ancient structures covered in eons of dust and geological deposits. Ruins of some civilization that had existed here long before the Federation or the Romulan Empire. The Romulan fighters hesitated at the crevasse entrance. Din could see it on his sensors. Their reluctance to follow into unknown territory. Good. Fear was a tool, and right now he needed every advantage. Grogu, Din said quietly. Remember what Counselor Troy showed you? About reaching through subspace to touch other minds? I need you to do that now. Touch their minds. Make them afraid. Make them see things that aren't there. The child's eyes widened, uncertain. This was beyond what they practiced. This was using his abilities as a weapon, something Din had tried to avoid teaching him. But this was survival. "I know, kid," Din murmured. "I know it's hard. But we need them to make a mistake. Just one mistake." Grogu closed his eyes, his small face scrunching with concentration. Din felt the air change, felt something building that made his teeth ache even through the helmet. The child was reaching out, pushing through subspace in ways that shouldn't be possible for someone his age, his training level. But Grogu had always been exceptional. On the sensors, Din watched one of the Romulan fighters suddenly veer erratically. Its weapon's fire went wild, hitting the canyon walls, hitting nothing. The pilot was seeing something. Phantom threats, maybe his worst fears made manifest in his cockpit. His wingman tried to compensate, calling out on comm channels Din could intercept but not understand. Then both fighters opened fire on each other. It lasted only seconds before they realized what was happening, broke off, tried to regroup. But seconds were enough. Din shot out of the ancient chamber, came up behind them while they were still disoriented, and eliminated both craft with precise shots to their engine cores. Silence. No more pursuers. Just Din's ship, damaged but functional, floating in a canyon on an unknown moon while somewhere above, Warbids and the Enterprise were still engaged in their deadly dance. Grogu slumped in his seat, exhausted, ears drooping. But alive. Safe. Din allowed himself 3 seconds to breathe, to process what had just happened. Then he was back on the controls, plotting his next move. The canyon led to the surface eventually. He could hide here for a while, let his shields recharge, let Grogu rest. But the Romulans wouldn't give up. They'd send more fighters, maybe land troops, maybe just bombard the entire area from orbit. His comm crackled. "Mandalorian vessel, this is the Enterprise. Mr. Djarin, please respond." Din hesitated, then activated the channel. "I'm here, Captain." Picard's voice carried relief and urgency. "Thank the Maker. We've driven off 2 of the Warbids, but Commander Tomalak's flagship remains. He's demanding we surrender you or he'll notify the Romulan High Command that the Federation is harboring a dangerous psionic weapon. Mr. Djarin, I need to know, what are your intentions? Will you run, or will you let us help you? Your help got me shot at in your own corridor." Din replied, then immediately regretted the harsh tone. These people had tried. Worf had literally held off borders so Din could escape. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. But Captain, as long as I'm near your ship, you're a target. Everyone around me is a target. That's been true since the day I took Grogu from the Imperial Remnant. It's not going to change just because we're in a different universe." "Perhaps not," Picard said. "But there's a difference between running from sector to sector hoping to stay ahead of your pursuers, and making a stand with allies who understand what you're fighting for. Mr. Djarin, the Federation isn't perfect. We've made mistakes, underestimated threats, failed to protect people we should have protected. But we don't abandon those who need our help. And more importantly, we don't surrender sentient beings to be used as weapons or experimental subjects." Din looked at Grogu, who was watching him with those enormous eyes, trusting him to make the right choice. Always trusting, even when Din wasn't sure he deserved that trust. "What are you proposing?" Din asked. "Come back to the Enterprise," Picard said. "We'll proceed to Federation space proper, away from the neutral zone. Starfleet Command needs to be informed of your presence, yes, but they'll also want to help. We have resources, Mr. Djarin. Scientists who understand dimensional physics, facilities that might be able to repair your hyperdrive or find another way to return you home. And in the meantime, the full protection of the Federation." "Protection that the Romulans just walked right through," Din said. "They caught us off guard," Picard admitted. "They won't again. And there are places in Federation space where even the Romulans won't dare to operate openly. Deep Space Nine, for instance, a station jointly operated by Starfleet and the Bajoran militia, positioned at the mouth of a stable wormhole. Easily defendable, with a command structure that understands unconventional threats." Din had no idea what most of those words meant, but he understood. Easily defendable. He understood. Protection. And despite everything, despite the attack and the chaos, he found himself wanting to believe Picard. Wanting to trust that maybe, in this universe, there were people who actually meant it when they said they'd help. If I come back, Din said slowly, I need guarantees. Written protocols. Grogu stays with me at all times. No experiments, no invasive scans, no evaluation by people I don't approve. He's not Federation property. He's not a research subject. He's a child under my protection. Agreed, Picard said without hesitation. I'll draft the protocols myself and submit them to Starfleet Command. You'll have full parental authority over the child, recognized under Federation law. No one touches him without your explicit consent. Din closed his eyes inside his helmet, weighing the decision. Stay on this moon, try to survive alone in a universe he didn't understand? Or trust these strangers, accept their help, and risk betrayal? The way had always taught self-reliance. Mandalorians stood alone if necessary, trusted their armor and their skills above all else. But the way had also taught the importance of clan, of foundlings, of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And right now, alone, he couldn't give Grogu what he needed. Couldn't help him master his abilities, couldn't find a way home, couldn't even guarantee his safety past the next Romulan patrol. All right, Din said. We're coming back. But Captain, if this goes wrong, if anyone tries to take him, I will tear through your ship to get him to safety. I need you to understand that. I do, Picard said quietly. And I respect it. Stand by for transport. We'll bring you directly to the bridge so you can see the situation for yourself. The transporter beam took him before he could second-guess the decision. The sensation was still wrong, still violating, but at least this time he knew it was coming. He materialized on the Enterprise's bridge, a circular command center with viewscreens and consoles, crew members at their stations, and at the center, Captain Picard standing beside his command chair. The main viewscreen showed the last Romulan warbird, holding position at extreme weapons range. Even from here, Din could see the damage on both ships. Scorch marks on the Enterprise's saucer section, a visible hull breach on the warbird's port side. Commander Tomalak, Picard said to the viewscreen, his voice carrying absolute authority. As you can see, Mr. Djarin has returned of his own free will. He is under Federation protection. This matter is concluded. Tomalak's face appeared on the screen, sharp features, calculating eyes, the expression of someone who knew when to push and when to retreat. For now, Picard. But the Romulan Empire has a long memory. This dimensional travel represents a security concern that transcends our usual diplomatic boundaries. We will be watching. As will we, Picard replied. Enterprise out. The screen went dark. A moment later, the warbird cloaked, vanishing from sensors. But Din knew better than to think they were truly gone. Watching, Tomalak had said. That meant surveillance, intelligence gathering, waiting for another opportunity. Mr. Worf, Picard said. Set course for Deep Space Nine, maximum warp. And send a priority message to Commander Sisko. Tell him we're incoming with unusual guests who require discreet accommodation. Aye, Captain. Worf rumbled. Picard turned to Din. Welcome back, Mr. Djarin. You've just had your first real introduction to Romulan hospitality. I'm afraid it won't be your last. Din looked down at Grogu, who had perked up slightly now that the danger seemed past. In my experience, Captain, there's always someone trying to take what's yours. The universe might have changed, but that part seems pretty consistent. Unfortunately true, Picard agreed. But you're no longer facing it alone. That has to count for something. Din didn't respond. He'd heard similar promises before, from New Republic officials, from mercenary groups, from people who claimed they wanted to help but really just wanted to use him. But he'd also learned to recognize genuine intent, and Picard seemed to have it. Time would tell if that was enough. The Enterprise traveled at warp speed for 3 days before reaching Deep Space Nine, and in those 3 days, Din Djarin learned more about this universe than he thought possible. Data provided him with database access, carefully curated to avoid overwhelming him, but comprehensive enough to paint a picture of the political landscape he'd stumbled into. The United Federation of Planets. A democratic alliance of over 150 member worlds, founded on principles of peaceful exploration and mutual cooperation. Starfleet, their exploratory and defensive arm, bound by regulations that seemed designed to prevent exactly the kind of exploitation Din had spent years fighting against. The Prime Directive, non-interference with less advanced civilizations, a rule that had apparently been broken and debated countless times. And then there were the threats. The Romulan Star Empire with its spies and schemes. The Klingon Empire, warrior poets who respected strength but had allied with the Federation after centuries of conflict. The Cardassian Union, recently weakened but still dangerous. The Borg Collective, cybernetic horrors that assimilated entire civilizations, turning them into drones. The Dominion, an empire from across a spatial anomaly called the Din Djarin wormhole, led by shape-shifting founders who saw themselves as gods. It was the Dominion that concerned Captain Benjamin Sisko, commander of Deep Space Nine. Din learned this during a subspace communication between Picard and Sisko, a conversation he wasn't supposed to overhear but did anyway because Mandalorian armor had excellent audio sensors. "You're bringing me a dimensional traveler with a psionic child during the middle of a Cold War with the Dominion," Sisko's voice had said, frustration evident. "Jean-Luc, you realize how this looks? We've got founder paranoia at an all-time high, everyone suspecting everyone else of being a shapeshifter, and now you want to introduce a being whose abilities we can't fully explain." "Benjamin," Picard had replied with patient firmness, "this child needs protection. The Romulans already tried to acquire him. If word reaches the Dominion, they'll see him as either a threat or an asset. Deep Space Nine is the most defensible position in Federation space. You have the Defiant, you have Din Djarin's support, and you have experience dealing with unconventional situations. If anyone can keep them safe, it's you." A long pause. Then Sisko had sighed. "All right. But they're your responsibility, Jean-Luc. Anything goes wrong, it's on your head." Now, as the Enterprise dropped out of warp and Deep Space Nine filled the view screen, Din understood why Picard had chosen this location. The station was massive. A Cardassian design, all brutal angles and industrial efficiency, now retrofitted with Federation technology. But more importantly, it was positioned at the mouth of the wormhole Picard had mentioned, a shimmering distortion in space that pulsed with colors that hurt to look at directly. "The Din Djarin wormhole," Data explained, standing beside Din at the viewport. "A stable passage between the Alpha Quadrant and the Gamma Quadrant, approximately 70,000 light-years. Inside the wormhole exist beings the Bajorans call the Prophets, non-corporeal entities who experience time non-linearly. They are protective of this region." "Protective how?" Din asked. "They have been known to intervene when they perceive threats to Bajorans or the wormhole itself," Data said. "Their capabilities are not fully understood, but they appear able to manipulate matter and energy on a scale that defies conventional physics. Some theorize they exist partially in subspace, which would make them sensitive to unusual psionic phenomena." Din didn't like the sound of that. "You're saying they might notice Grogu?" "It is possible," Data admitted. "However, the Prophets have historically shown benevolence toward those who mean no harm. If anything, their presence might provide an additional layer of protection." The Enterprise glided into docking position, magnetic clamps engaging with solid thunks that resonated through the hull. Picard appeared at Din's side, straightening his uniform with a gesture that seemed more habit than necessity. "Commander Sisko will meet us in his office," Picard said. "He's direct. Former Starfleet engineer, promoted to command during the Cardassian withdrawal from Bajorans. Lost his wife to the Borg at Wolf 359. He understands loss, Mr. Djarin. And he understands the need to protect innocent life, whatever form it takes." They walked through corridors that were noticeably different from the Enterprise's clean aesthetics, darker, more utilitarian, with Cardassian architecture visible beneath Federation modifications. The station hummed with activity, Starfleet officers mixing with Bajoran militia in their distinctive earrings, Ferengi merchants hawking goods from kiosks, aliens of species Din had never seen conducting business in the promenade. Grogu watched everything with wide eyes, his ears perked forward with fascination. He'd recovered from the exertion of the battle, thanks to Dr. Crusher's care and Counselor Troy's continued training. The child was adapting faster than Din had dared hope, his abilities growing stronger each day as he learned to work with subspace instead of against it. They reached the commander's office, a circular room with viewports overlooking the promenade and the wormhole beyond. Behind a desk that looked designed for someone who preferred action to paperwork sat Benjamin Sisko, a man with a shaved head, a beard, and eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. Standing beside him was something that made Din's hand move instinctively toward his blaster, a humanoid figure in a Starfleet uniform whose face seemed to flow and shift subtly, like liquid barely maintaining form. "Security Chief Odo," Picard said quickly, noting Din's reaction. "He's a shapeshifter, but not Dominion. One of a kind, as far as we know." Odo's expression, such as it was, suggested he'd seen this reaction many times and was thoroughly tired of it. "I'm aware I make people uncomfortable, Mr. Djarin. But I'm also the reason this station hasn't been infiltrated by actual founders. I can detect my own kind. I will know if they try to replace anyone on DS9 with a shapeshifter." Din forced his hand away from the weapon. "No offense intended." "None taken," Odo replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. Sisko stood, offering his hand. Din shook it after a moment's hesitation. The gesture was apparently universal. "Welcome to Deep Space Nine," Sisko said. "Captain Picard has briefed me on your situation. Dimensional traveler, unique propulsion technology, child with psionic abilities that are attracting unwanted attention. Did I miss anything?" "The part where the Romulans will keep trying to acquire him," Din said bluntly. "And probably anyone else who learns what he can do." "Probably," Sisko agreed with the kind of honesty Din appreciated. "But here's the thing, Mr. Djarin. This station sits at the intersection of two quadrants. We deal with threats from the Gamma Quadrant that make the Romulans look like minor annoyances. We've faced down Dominion fleets, Jem'Hadar soldiers bred specifically for combat, and founders who can infiltrate anywhere by becoming anyone. If the Romulans want to try something here, they're welcome to try. They won't succeed." He gestured to the viewport, where a sleek, powerful-looking ship was visible docked at the station. "That's the Defiant. Prototype warship, designed specifically to fight the Borg. Ablative armor, quantum torpedoes, pulse phaser cannons. She's overpowered and overgunned for her size. If we need to evacuate you in a hurry or defend against hostile forces, she can do both." Din studied the ship, his professional eye appreciating the design. Compact, aggressive, built for war rather than exploration. More honest than the Enterprise's diplomatic pretensions. "I appreciate the tour," Din said. "But what's the cost? In my experience, protection always comes with a price." Sisko smiled slightly, as if he'd been expecting the question. "Smart man. Here's what I need first: cooperation. If we're going to protect you and the child, we need to understand the threats you might attract. That means sharing information about where you came from, what the child can do, and who might come looking for him. Second, compliance with station regulations. I can't have you shooting people in my promenade or launching from the docking bay without clearance. And third..." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "I need you to let our doctors and scientists try to help the child adjust to his abilities. Not as experiments, but as training. Because right now, he's broadcasting psionic energy like a beacon, and that's going to attract attention from things worse than the Romulans." "What kind of things?" Din asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The Founders," Odo said quietly. "The rulers of the Dominion." They're shapeshifters like me, but they exist in a liquid state when not maintaining solid form. They're also telepathically linked to each other through something called the Great Link. A child with psionic abilities strong enough to affect multiple targets simultaneously, to manipulate minds across subspace, they would see him as either a threat to the link or a tool to control their Jem'Hadar soldiers more effectively. Grogu made a small, distressed sound. Din pulled the child closer. No one's using him as a tool. I agree completely, Sisko said. Which is why we need to help him learn control. Right now, he's like a ship broadcasting its position on all frequencies. We need to teach him to reduce that signature, to shield his abilities when he's not using them. We have people who can help. Counselor Troy from the Enterprise is one, but we also have others. A Vulcan science officer named Trull who understands psionic disciplines. Even Odo has insights into how to control abilities that feel instinctive but need conscious regulation. Din looked down at Grogu, who gazed back with trusting eyes. The child had been through so much already, hunted, experimented on by the Empire's remnants, separated from his kind. But Sisko was right. If Grogu couldn't control his abilities, couldn't shield himself, he would always be a target. Always be in danger. All right, Din said finally. But I want to be present for all training sessions. No private consultations, no taking him somewhere without me. And if at any point I think someone's crossing a line, we're done. Fair enough, Sisko agreed. He tapped his desk console. Major Kira, could you come to my office, please? And bring those quarters assignments we discussed. A moment later, a Bajoran woman entered, strong features, direct gaze, the bearing of someone who'd fought for everything she had. Commander. She acknowledged Sisko, then turned to Din with undisguised curiosity. So you're the one causing all the fuss. Dimensional traveler, warrior culture, mysterious child. The rumors are already spreading through the station. Major Kira Neri's first officer. Sisko introduced her. Bajoran resistance fighter, survivor, and someone who understands what it means to protect your people against overwhelming odds. Kira studied Din with an expression that suggested she was measuring him the way warriors measured each other, not with hostility, but with professional assessment. We've set aside quarters for you in the habitat ring, she said. Isolated section, extra security, close to emergency transport points if you need to reach the Defiant quickly. You'll also have access to Quark's bar on the promenade. Don't let him overcharge you, and definitely don't play Dabo unless you want to lose everything you own. Quark's the Ferengi bartender? Din asked, remembering Picard's warnings about the species. Owner, entrepreneur, occasional useful source of information, Kira corrected. He's irritating and greedy, but he's also surprisingly good at reading people and situations. Plus, his bar is neutral territory. Everyone goes there, Starfleet, Bajorans, visitors, even the occasional Cardassian. You want to understand station politics, you sit at Quark's bar and listen. Din nodded slowly. This was starting to feel familiar. A port station with multiple factions, neutral ground in dangerous territory, information flowing through unofficial channels. He'd worked places like this in his own galaxy. The players were different, but the game was the same. One more thing, Sisko said, his tone shifting to something more formal. There's a ship approaching the station. Federation registry, but... He exchanged a glance with Odo. Chief, you want to explain? Odo's liquid features arranged themselves into what might have been disapproval. Section 31. They're a covert intelligence organization that officially doesn't exist. They handle threats to the Federation that Starfleet can't or won't address through official channels. Assassination, sabotage, preemptive strikes against potential enemies. They operate completely outside normal regulations. Din's hand moved back to his blaster. And they're coming here because? Because someone in Starfleet Command decided your presence needed to be evaluated by people with no accountability, Sisko said, his voice hard with disgust. I've dealt with Section 31 before. They're dangerous, Mr. Djarin. They see threats everywhere, and they neutralize them with extreme prejudice. If they decide the child represents a danger to the Federation. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Din stood, Grogu held securely against his chest. Then we're leaving. Right now. Point me to my ship and get out of the way. Wait, Picard said urgently. Mr. Djarin, running will only confirm their suspicions. If Section 31 believes you're a threat, they'll hunt you across the entire Federation. But if we can convince them that you're not. I don't play politics with people who want my son dead. Din interrupted, using the word deliberately for the first time. That's not negotiable. The room fell silent. Sisko and Picard exchanged looks that spoke of quick, unspoken communication. Finally, Sisko nodded. All right, he said. Here's what we do. You and the child stay in secure quarters. Don't interact with the Section 31 operative. Picard and I will handle the meeting, convince them that you're not a threat, that the child is just a refugee who needs protection. Meanwhile, Chief Odo will monitor the station for any covert operatives they might have already in place. If things go south, Major Kira will get you to the Defiant, and will evacuate you to Federation space proper where Section 31 has less operational freedom. It wasn't a good plan. Too many variables, too much reliance on people Din barely knew. But it was better than running blind into a universe where he didn't know the safe routes, the neutral ports, the places where a fugitive could disappear. Fine, Din said. But I want weapons in these quarters. Real weapons, not just hand phasers. And I want sensor access so I can monitor anyone approaching. Done, Sisko agreed. Major, get them settled. And people, he looked around the room. If Section 31 gets anywhere near that child, I want to know about it immediately. I don't care what authority they claim to have. The quarters Major Kira assigned them were more fortress than accommodation. Reinforced bulkheads, independent life support systems, emergency transport capability directly to the Defiant's transporter room. Din approved. He spent the first hour mapping every access point, testing the door locks, examining the weapons locker Sisko had promised, fully stocked with phaser rifles, hand phasers, and even a few photon grenades that seemed wildly excessive for personal defense. Grogu explored the space with cautious curiosity, his small hands touching surfaces that flickered with alien technology. The child had grown quieter since the attack, more watchful. Learning, Din realized. Adapting to a universe where threats came from directions he'd never anticipated. Computer, Din said, testing the voice interface. Show me sensor feeds for this section of the habitat ring. A display materialized above the desk. Holographic, three-dimensional, showing the corridor outside and adjacent sections. Empty for now, but Din could see the patrol patterns of station security, the rhythms of normal traffic. He'd memorized those patterns, know immediately when something changed. His helmet comm chirped, Picard's frequency. Mr. Djarin, the Section 31 operative has arrived. A woman named Sloane. She's requesting to meet with you privately. Not happening, Din replied immediately. That's what I told her, Picard said. But she's persistent. She claims to have information about dimensional rifts, about possible ways to return you home. She wants to discuss them with you directly. Din's jaw clenched inside his helmet. Classic manipulation, offer hope, use it to get close, then strike when defenses were lowered. He'd seen it 1,000 times. Tell her I'm not interested in anything she has to say unless it comes through official Starfleet channels with full transparency. Already did, Picard said with what sounded like satisfaction. She didn't appreciate it. Commander Sisko is currently explaining that Deep Space Nine operates under specific protocols and that Section 31's usual methods won't work here. It's entertaining to watch. A second voice cut into the channel, female, cold, precise. Mr. Djarin, I'm Commander Sloane. I understand your reluctance to engage with my organization. But I assure you, we have no hostile intent. We simply need to assess whether your presence poses a security risk to the Federation. Din didn't respond. Silence was its own kind of weapon. Your child's abilities, Sloane continued undeterred, represent technology or biology far beyond our current understanding. In the wrong hands, Romulan, Dominion, even rogue Federation elements, he could be weaponized. Used to infiltrate minds, control populations, subvert entire governments. Surely you understand our concern. I understand that you see a child as a threat instead of a person who needs protection, Din replied, his voice flat. That tells me everything I need to know about your organization. Pragmatism isn't cruelty, Mr. Djarin, Sloane said. It's survival. The Federation faces existential threats, the Borg, the Dominion, species we haven't even encountered yet. We can't afford to ignore potential dangers just because they come in innocent packages. Then we have nothing to discuss, Din said, and terminated the connection. The holographic display flickered. For a moment, Din thought it was a malfunction. Then he realized someone was hacking the station's internal sensors, trying to access the feed from his quarters. The attempt was sophisticated, layered with protocols designed to appear like routine maintenance. Computer, isolate this section from main sensor grid, Din commanded. Authorization. He paused, realizing he didn't have authorization codes. Contact Chief Odo. Security breach in progress. The display went dark. Emergency lighting activated, bathing the quarters in amber. And through the viewport, Din saw something that made his blood run cold. A Romulan warbird decloaking directly above the station, weapons charging. The comm erupted with voices, Cisco barking orders, Kira coordinating defensive positions, alarms wailing across the station. Din grabbed Grogu, already moving toward the weapons locker when the door to their quarters opened. Not forced. Not blasted. Just opened, as if the locks had decided to disengage on their own. Standing in the corridor was Sloane, flanked by two operatives in nondescript uniforms. But what froze Din's hand on his blaster was the third figure, a changeling, its face rippling with liquid motion, wearing the same uniform as Odo but subtly wrong in ways Din's instincts screamed about. Founder, Din said, the word a curse. Very perceptive, the changeling said, its voice unsettlingly calm. Section 31 and the Dominion have overlapping interests in your child, Mr. Djarin. An alliance of convenience. We provide the Romulan distraction and infiltration capability. They provide extraction expertise and somewhere to take the child where neither the Federation nor our usual enemies will find him. Sloane had the decency to look uncomfortable. This wasn't my first choice, Mr. Djarin. But the child represents too significant a variable. Section 31's mandate is to protect the Federation at any cost. Sometimes that means temporary alliances with distasteful partners. Din's hand moved to his blaster, drew it in one fluid motion, and fired directly at the changeling. The phaser beam passed through what looked like a solid target, but was actually already flowing, reforming behind Din's position. Changelings didn't have to obey normal physics. They were physics, matter that could reconfigure itself at will. The Founder's hand became a blade, stabbing toward Din's back. He twisted, the strike deflecting off his Beskar armor with a metallic shriek. Grogu cried out, and Din felt the air pressure change as the child reached out instinctively with his abilities. The changeling staggered as if struck by an invisible hammer. Its form destabilized, losing cohesion for a moment before reforming with visible effort. Fascinating, it said, sounding genuinely surprised. The child can affect us even in liquid state. The Founders will be most interested in this capability. You're not taking him, Din snarled, firing again while backing toward the weapons locker. This time he adjusted the phaser to maximum dispersal, not trying to hit the changeling, but to superheat the air around it. Changelings were matter, and matter responded to temperature. The Founder recoiled from the thermal bloom, its form rippling with discomfort. Sloane's operatives moved in with weapons drawn, some kind of energy nets designed to restrain rather than kill. Din triggered his jetpack, rocketing backward through his quarters. Grogu clutched to his chest. He crashed through the viewport, transparent aluminum shattering under the impact of Beskar and momentum, and out into the station's interior. Deep Space Nine was built with a hollow center, multiple levels visible from the promenade below. Din's jetpack screamed as he dove toward the lower levels, phaser fire tracking him from above. People scattered, screaming. Station security was responding, but too slowly. They'd been caught off guard by the Romulan attack, their attention divided. Din's HUD painted tactical data: 3 hostiles pursuing, Romulan boarding parties materializing on upper levels, station shields holding but weakening under sustained fire. He needed to reach his ship, or the Defiant. Preferably his ship. He trusted his own equipment more than borrowed vessels. He landed hard on the promenade, rolled to absorb impact, came up running toward the docking ring. Grogu was crying now, frightened but unhurt, his small hands gripping Din's armor. Behind them, one of Sloane's operatives dropped from an upper level, using some kind of personal transporter to keep pace. Then the promenade exploded with weapons fire from an unexpected direction. Not aimed at Din, but at his pursuers. Klingon, 4 of them, in full battle armor, wielding batleths and disruptors with enthusiastic violence. They'd been drinking at Quark's bar when the fighting started, and apparently decided that helping the Mandalorian constituted glorious combat. Kapla! One bellowed, decapitating Sloane's operative with a single swing. Today is a good day to fight. Din didn't stop to question the assistants. He just ran, grateful for allies even if he didn't understand why they were helping. The docking ring entrance was ahead, already sealed under emergency protocols. He fired his grappling line at the control panel, used the cable to swing up and over the security barriers, crashed through into the docking bay area. His ship was there, exactly where he'd left it. But so was Odo, standing between Din and the vessel with his arms crossed. "I can't let you leave," Odo said, his voice heavy with regret. "Not during a battle. Cisco's orders: all ships remain docked until the situation is resolved." "Odo, there's a founder on this station working with Section 31, Din said urgently. "They're trying to take Grogu. If I don't leave now—" "I know about the founder," Odo interrupted. "I felt it the moment it came aboard. I've been tracking it through the station's infrastructure. But Mr. Djarin, if you undock during a firefight, the Romulans will target you immediately. Their weapons will tear through your shields in seconds. Your best chance is to stay on the station where our defenses can protect you. Your defenses just let a changeling walk into my quarters," Din shot back. "Because Section 31 provided it with command codes I didn't know existed," Odo replied, genuine anger in his voice. "But that stops now. Commander Sisko has invoked emergency protocols. Section 31's authority is suspended, the founder is being hunted by every security team on the station, and the Romulans are about to learn why you don't attack Deep Space Nine." As if to punctuate his words, the station shuddered with the impact of massive weapons fire, but not incoming. Outgoing. Through the docking bay's viewports, Din saw the Defiant undocking, its pulse phasers already firing, quantum torpedoes streaking toward the Romulan warbird in brilliant points of light. The warbird's shields flared, absorbed the initial barrage, then began buckling under sustained fire. The Defiant was small compared to the warbird, but it fought with vicious efficiency, darting around the larger vessel, targeting weapons arrays and shield generators with surgical precision. "Chief Odo to all security teams," Odo said into his comm badge. "The founder is heading toward the promenade, trying to reach transporter range of the Romulan ship. Converge on that position. Use wide dispersal phasers, force it to maintain solid form." Din made a decision. "I'm going after it." "That's inadvisable," Odo said. "Founders are extremely dangerous in close combat." "So am I," Din interrupted, already moving back toward the promenade. "And it wants my son. That makes it my problem." He found the changeling 3 levels down, cornered by station security but holding them at bay by constantly shifting form. becoming a barrier when they fired, flowing through gaps when they tried to surround it, striking out with blade limbs when anyone got too close. Din assessed the situation in seconds. The security teams were trained for normal threats: smugglers, drunken brawls, the occasional Cardassian spy. Not for opponents who could turn into liquid metal or split into multiple smaller forms. But Din had fought things just as strange. Mudhorns that could gore through durasteel. Dark troopers that shrugged off blaster fire. Crate dragons that could swallow a ship whole. You didn't survive as a Mandalorian bounty hunter by being predictable. He triggered his flamethrower. Changelings were matter. Matter burned. The Founder shrieked, an inhuman sound that echoed through the promenade, as flames engulfed its form. It tried to flow away from the heat, but Din tracked it, kept the flames trained on its shifting mass. Not trying to kill it, he suspected that was nearly impossible. But to keep it from escaping, to force it into a form that could be contained. Station security caught on, adjusting their phasers to thermal settings, adding their own heat to the attack. The Founder collapsed into a puddle of writhing liquid, unable to maintain coherent solid form under the sustained thermal assault. "Containment field, now!" Odo shouted, and security activated a portable force field generator, trapping the Founder in a cylinder of energy. The liquid churned furiously inside the field but couldn't breach it. Odo approached slowly, studying his imprisoned counterpart with an expression Din couldn't quite read. "Why?" Odo asked quietly. "Why would a Founder work with Section 31? That goes against everything the Dominion stands for." The liquid shifted, formed a rough approximation of a face. "Because the Dominion sees what you refuse to see, Odo. This child could destroy the link, could reach into our collective consciousness, and tear it apart from within. We had to act before he learned the full extent of his abilities. Before he became a threat we couldn't contain. So you would kidnap a child because of what he might do?" Odo's voice was harsh with disgust. "You've become exactly what the Solids fear, monsters who see threats in innocence." The Founder had no response. Or perhaps it simply didn't care about Odo's judgment. Din turned away, Grogu still held securely in his arms. The child had stopped crying, was watching the captured Founder with an expression that looked far too old for his years. Understanding, maybe? Or recognizing something in the Founder's fear that resonated with his own experiences of being hunted. "It's over, kid," Din murmured. "You're safe." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The Romulan attack had been driven off. He could see the warbird retreating through the viewport, trailing plasma from ruptured conduits. The Founder was captured. Section 31's operation had failed. But they would try again. Someone would always try again. Because Grogu was powerful, and power attracted predators the way stars attracted planets. Sisko appeared at Din's side, his uniform singed from firefight damage, his expression grim but satisfied. "The station is secure," he reported. "Romulan boarding parties have been repelled, the changeling is in custody, and I've sent a very strongly worded message to Starfleet Command about Section 31's activities. They won't be welcome on my station again. Until the next crisis," Din said quietly. "Until the next crisis," Sisko agreed. "But Mr. Djarin, here's what I learned today: you can fight. You can protect that child. And you don't give up, even when the odds are impossible. Those are qualities I respect. So here's what I'm offering: stay on DS9 as long as you need to. Train with our security forces. Let us help Grogu master his abilities. And when the time comes that we've found a way to send you home, or you've decided to make a life here, you'll do it with the full support of everyone on this station." Din looked at the commander, then at the station around him, damaged but standing, defended by people who'd chosen to fight for strangers rather than surrender them to expedience. Klingon who joined the battle for honor. Odo who'd hunted his own kind to protect a child he barely knew. Kira and her security teams who'd held the line against overwhelming force. Maybe, Din thought, the way didn't have to mean standing alone. Maybe it could mean standing with others who understood what honor really meant. "All right," he said. "We'll stay. For now." Grogu cooed softly, his ears perking up for the first time since the attack. And Din allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something like sanctuary. Even if it was only temporary. 2 weeks passed on Deep Space Nine, and Din Djarin fell into something that almost resembled a routine. Mornings were spent with Grogu in training sessions, Counselor Troy teaching the child to modulate his psionic signature, to shield his thoughts when he wanted privacy, to reach out with precision rather than broadcasting his abilities indiscriminately. The Vulcan science officer, Tro, provided meditation techniques that helped Grogu center himself, find calm in the chaos of station life. Afternoons, Din trained with Major Kira's security forces. Hand-to-hand combat against species with 4 arms, 6 limbs, natural armor. Tactical simulations in the holosuits, defending against Jem'Hadar assault teams, Cardassian infiltration units, Romulan boarding parties. He learned Federation weapons, their capabilities and limitations. And he taught them Mandalorian combat techniques, how to fight when outnumbered, how to use armor as a weapon, how to turn any environment into a fortress. The security teams respected him. Not because he was friendly, he wasn't, but because he was competent, professional, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to protecting Grogu. They'd seen him fight the Changeling, had watched him hold off Section 31 operatives while carrying a child. That kind of dedication spoke louder than words. Evenings, Din would take Grogu to Quark's bar. The Ferengi had initially tried to overcharge him for everything. "You're a dimensional traveler, that makes you exotic. Exotic means premium pricing." Until Din had calmly explained that where he came from, people who cheated Mandalorians tended to have short, unpleasant lives. They'd reached an understanding after that. Fair prices, no questions about the armor, and Quark would keep his enormous ears open for useful information. It was during one of these evenings that things changed. Din was sitting at the bar, Grogu on the stool beside him enjoying a brightly colored drink that was mostly sugar and food coloring, when the station's proximity alarms began wailing. Not the urgent attack klaxons from the Romulan incident, but the curious, uncertain tones that meant something unexpected had appeared. Through the bar's viewports, Din saw it, a massive spatial distortion forming near the wormhole, reality twisting in ways that made his helmet's sensors scream error messages. Colors that shouldn't exist bled through the distortion, purples so deep they hurt to perceive, greens that tasted like sound, geometries that existed in more dimensions than 3. And then, impossibly, a ship emerged. Not from the wormhole, but through the distortion itself. A ship Din recognized with a jolt of impossible hope and immediate dread. It was an Imperial Star Destroyer. Not the sleek, newer models of the First Order. This was Old Empire. Wedge-shaped, bristling with weapons, painted in the gray of Palpatine's reign. Damaged, trailing plasma, clearly barely functional. But unmistakably from Din's galaxy. The bar erupted in chaos. Quark was shouting about needing to secure his merchandise. Patrons were scrambling for exits. Security teams were mobilizing. And Din just sat there, frozen, staring at a piece of his universe that had somehow followed him into this one. "Cisco to all hands," the commander's voice came over the station's intercom. "Unidentified vessel has appeared via spatial anomaly. Configuration unknown. Weapon signatures are off the scale, technology we don't recognize. All personnel to defensive stations. Someone get me a visual on that ship's markings." Din's comm badge, he'd accepted one after the Changeling incident, reluctantly admitting it was useful, chirped. "Mr. Djarin, this is Commander Cisco. Please report to Ops immediately. We need your expertise." Din grabbed Grogu, already moving toward the turbolift. His mind was racing through possibilities. An Imperial Star Destroyer meant Imperials, officers, stormtroopers, possibly Moffs or even remnant warlords. People who knew what Grogu was, what he represented. People who had tried to kill the child for his blood, his cells, his connection to the Force. If they were here, if they'd followed through the same dimensional rift that had brought Din across. He reached Ops DS9's command center, circular and elevated with view screens showing tactical displays of the entire sector. Sisko stood at the center, Data beside him analyzing sensor readings, Kira coordinating defensive positions. Odo was there too, his liquid features arranged in suspicious contemplation. "Mr. Djarin," Sisko said without preamble. "What are we looking at?" Din stared at the view screen showing the Star Destroyer. Even damaged, it dwarfed Deep Space Nine. Kilometers long, bristling with turbolaser batteries, fighter bays, tractor beam projectors. A ship designed for one purpose: planetary subjugation and orbital superiority. "Imperial Star Destroyer," Din said, his voice carefully neutral despite the emotions churning inside him. "Capital ship from my galaxy. Designed to carry thousands of troops, dozens of fighters, enough firepower to glass a planet's surface. That specific configuration is old. Probably from the Empire's height, before it fell. If it came through the same rift I did, it's been badly damaged by the transition. Can it hurt us?" Sisko asked bluntly. "If even a fraction of its weapons are operational, yes," Din said. "A single turbolaser battery has more firepower than anything I've seen in Federation arsenals. And that's a standard Imperial ship. There were worse things in the Imperial fleet." Data was studying his console with visible fascination. "Remarkable. The energy signatures are completely foreign to our technology base. The weapons appear to use coherent plasma rather than our phased energy arrays. The propulsion system. I cannot even begin to categorize it. This is not warp technology, not impulse drive, nothing in our databases." "Hailing them now," Kira said, fingers dancing across her console. "A known vessel, this is Deep Space Nine. You have entered Federation space. Identify yourself and state your intentions. We are prepared to offer assistance if you require it." Static. Then a voice that made Din's blood run cold, cultured, imperial, dripping with the arrogance of someone who'd never been told no and survived. "This is Moff Gideon of the Imperial Security Bureau. To whom am I speaking?" Din grabbed the edge of the console, his knuckles white inside his gloves. Gideon. The man who'd hunted Grogu across the galaxy, who'd built dark troopers to capture him, who'd experimented with the child's blood to create force-sensitive abominations. The man Din had defeated, trapped aboard his own cruiser, left for New Republic justice. Apparently, justice had been postponed by dimensional rifts. "This is Commander Benjamin Sisko of the United Federation of Planets," Sisko replied, his tone professional but wary. "Moff Gideon, your vessel appears heavily damaged. Do you require emergency assistance?" A pause. When Gideon spoke again, his voice carried amusement. "How diplomatic. Yes, Commander, our situation is complicated. We encountered a spatial anomaly while engaged in law enforcement operations. Our hyperdrive was damaged in the transition, and we find ourselves in unfamiliar space with limited resources. We would gratefully accept any assistance you can provide. In return, we have unique technologies that might interest your Federation." "I know what he wants," Din said quietly, speaking directly to Sisko. "He's lying about law enforcement. He's a war criminal, a remnant of a fallen empire that committed genocide across 1,000 worlds. And he's here because he was chasing us when we crossed over. He wants Grogu. He's wanted him for years." Sisko's expression hardened. "Understood." He turned back to the comm. "Moff Gideon, before we discuss assistance, I need to clarify something. We have refugees from your dimension already aboard this station. A Mandalorian and a child. Are you familiar with them?" Another pause, longer this time. "Ah," Gideon said, and Din could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Din Djarin. And the asset?" "Yes, Commander, I'm very familiar with them. Djarin is wanted for multiple violations of Imperial law, theft of Imperial property, assault on Imperial personnel, conspiracy against the state." The child is a matter of state security. I would be most grateful if you could detain them until we can arrange proper transfer to Imperial custody. That's not going to happen, Sisko said flatly. They're under Federation protection. Whatever crimes you claim they committed occurred in another dimension, another jurisdiction. They have no bearing here. Commander. Gideon's voice took on a harder edge. I don't think you understand the situation. That child represents a biological weapon of unprecedented capability. In the wrong hands, and Djarin's are very much the wrong hands, he could destabilize entire civilizations. Surely your Federation has protocols for containing such threats? We do, Sisko replied. And we've evaluated both the Mandalorian and the child. They pose no threat to Federation security. In fact, they've already helped defend this station against hostile forces. Your claim has no merit. Then we have a problem, Gideon said, his cultured tone barely masking the threat beneath. Because I have 2,000 stormtroopers, 40 TIE fighters, and enough firepower to reduce your station to debris. I will recover Imperial property, Commander. One way or another. The comm cut off. The ops center erupted in activity. Kira was already deploying the Defiant, calling in reinforcements from nearby Starfleet vessels. Data was analyzing the Star Destroyer's weapons capabilities, calculating firing solutions and defensive strategies. Odo was coordinating station security, preparing for potential boarding actions. And Din stood there, Grogu clutched to his chest, staring at the viewscreen where the Star Destroyer hung like a knife pointed at their throats. We need to evacuate them, Kira said urgently. Get them on the Defiant, make a run for it while we hold Gideon off. He'll follow, Din said. He always follows. And if you evacuate us, you make yourself a target for harboring fugitives. I won't let you sacrifice your station for us. It's not your decision, Sisko said firmly. You're under our protection, Mr. Djarin. That means we fight for you if necessary. Against an Imperial Star Destroyer? Din shook his head. Commander, you don't understand what you're facing. I've seen these ships reduce entire rebel fleets to slag. I've watched them bombard cities into glass. Your weapons might damage it, but you can't destroy it. Not before it destroys you. Then what do you suggest? Sisko demanded. Din looked down at Grogu, who was watching him with those enormous, trusting eyes. The child who'd survived an Imperial purge, who'd been hunted across the galaxy, who'd found safety with a Mandalorian bounty hunter who'd chosen to break every rule to protect him. An idea formed. Dangerous. Probably suicidal. But possibly the only way to end this without DS9 becoming a debris field. Let me talk to him, Din said. Gideon wants Grogu, but what he really wants is power. Control. If I can convince him there's something more valuable here, something that makes Grogu irrelevant. What could possibly be more valuable than a child with psionic abilities? Data asked. Din turned to face them, his helmet hiding the grim smile beneath. Information. Technology. Access to an entire universe the Empire never knew existed. Gideon's ambitious. He didn't rise to Moff by being satisfied with what he had. If I offer him something bigger than Grogu, something that could make him more powerful than any Imperial remnant warlord. You want to make a deal with him, Odo said, his voice flat with disapproval. Negotiate with a war criminal. I want to buy time. Din corrected. Time for you to analyze his ship's weaknesses. Time to call in those Starfleet reinforcements. Time to figure out how to either send him back where he came from or neutralize him permanently. But mostly, I want him focused on me instead of firing on this station. Sisko studied Din for a long moment. You realize he's not going to honor any agreement you make. The moment he has what he wants, or thinks he has it, he'll try to take Grogu anyway. I know, Din said. But I'm a Mandalorian, Commander. We're very good at making people think they have what they want right up until the moment they realize they don't. Grogu cooed softly, reaching up to touch Din's helmet. The child understood, in his way. understood that his protector was about to walk into danger, was about to face the man who'd hurt him, experimented on him, tried to turn him into a weapon. Din touched Grogu's small hand with his gloved one. "Stay with Commander Sisko," he said quietly. "I'll come back. I promise." "Mr. Djarin," Sisko began. "This is the way," Din interrupted. "I protect him. Whatever it takes. That hasn't changed just because we're in a different universe." He handed Grogu to Counselor Troy, who'd appeared in Ops during the crisis. The child whimpered, reaching for Din, but the Mandalorian was already turning toward the comm station. "Open a channel to Gideon's ship," Din said. "Let's see if the Moff is interested in negotiation. Or if he's as predictable as I remember." The channel opened with a crackle of interference. Two different communication technologies struggling to find common ground. When Moff Gideon's face appeared on the viewscreen, Din felt a surge of cold fury that he forced down through years of discipline. The Moff looked exactly as Din remembered: sharp features, calculating eyes, the self-satisfied expression of someone who believed himself the smartest person in any room. "Din Djarin," Gideon said, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "How unexpected. I assumed you'd be hiding behind your new friends, letting them fight your battles. Perhaps there's more honor in you than I credited." "I'm not here to trade insults," Din said flatly. "I'm here to propose something that serves both our interests." Gideon's eyebrow rose fractionally. "I'm listening. You want Grogu because of his abilities, his connection to the Force, his potential to enhance your cloning experiments, to create Force-sensitive soldiers. But you're damaged, stranded in a universe you don't understand, with limited resources and no way home. Even if you took him, what would you do? Where would you go?" "I'm certain I would find options," Gideon replied smoothly. "This Federation of yours seems quite advanced. Their technology could be adapted for Imperial purposes. Technology they'll never give you," Din countered. "Because they know what you are. They've seen your ship, analyzed your weapons. They know you represent a threat. The moment you fire on this station, every ship in Federation space will hunt you down. You might survive one battle, maybe two. But eventually, they'll overwhelm you. And you'll die in a universe that won't even remember your name." For the first time, something flickered in Gideon's expression. Not fear, but calculation. The man was ambitious, not suicidal. He was measuring odds, considering angles. "What are you proposing?" Gideon asked. Din took a breath, preparing to gamble everything on a lie wrapped in just enough truth to be believable. "There's a place in this universe, the Bajran wormhole. It connects to another quadrant entirely, 70,000 light-years away in an instant. On the other side is the Dominion, an empire that makes the old Republic look like a regional government. But more importantly, there are resources. Technologies. Entire species with abilities that make Force sensitivity look simple." He paused, letting the bait dangle. "The Federation guards that wormhole jealously. But they're spread thin right now, dealing with threats on multiple fronts. If you had a way through, if you could establish yourself in the Gamma Quadrant before they realized what you were doing, you wouldn't need Grogu. You'd have access to something far more valuable, an entire quadrant to claim for your empire." Gideon was silent for a long moment, his mind clearly working through the implications. "And why would you tell me this? What prevents me from simply taking the child and investigating this wormhole on my own?" "Because you need a guide," Din said. "Someone who knows how Federation technology works, who understands their defensive patterns, who can help you navigate through the wormhole without triggering every alarm in the sector. I can do that. But in exchange, you leave Grogu alone. Forever. You forget he exists. You would betray these people who've protected you." Gideon asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly troubled by the concept. "How very practical of you, Djarin. I didn't think Mandalorians were capable of such flexibility." "Mandalorians protect their own," Din replied. "These people aren't my clan. They're not my tribe. They're just convenient allies in a universe where I have no other options. If it comes down to their safety or Grogu's, I choose him. Every time. Behind him, Din could feel Sisko's eyes boring into his back. Kira's hand was probably on her phaser, ready to stun him for even suggesting betrayal. But they had to trust him. Had to believe he knew what he was doing. Gideon leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Very well. Here are my terms. You will come aboard my vessel alone. No weapons, no armor, no hidden surprises. You will provide detailed information about this wormhole, the Federation's defensive capabilities, and a viable route to the Gamma Quadrant. In exchange, I will leave the station intact and cease pursuing the child. Do we have an agreement? One modification, Din said. I keep my armor. It's part of my creed. I don't remove it in front of others. But I'll surrender my weapons. That's as much as I'm willing to compromise. Gideon considered this, then nodded. Acceptable. My transporters will bring you aboard in 5 minutes. I suggest you say your goodbyes, Djarin. Something tells me this will be a one-way journey. The channel closed. The ops center exploded with voices. Kira was shouting about insanity, about walking into an obvious trap. Data was calculating probability of survival, apparently less than 3%. Even Odo was shaking his head, his liquid features arranged in what might have been sympathy or disgust. But Sisko raised his hand, and the chaos subsided. Everyone out, he said quietly. Except Mr. Djarin. The crew filed out, leaving just Din, Sisko, and Grogu. Still being held by Counselor Troy, who'd positioned herself protectively in the corner. When they were alone, Sisko approached Din, his expression unreadable. That was quite a performance, Sisko said. Almost believed it myself. So what's the real plan? Din felt tension he hadn't realized he was carrying ease slightly from his shoulders. You knew I was lying. I know desperation when I see it, Sisko replied. And I know no Mandalorian would betray people who've bled beside him. Major Kira told me about the Klingon who helped you during the Section 31 attack. They're still on the station, still drinking at Quark's bar, waiting to see if you'll honor the debt. Warriors recognize other warriors, Mr. Djarin. You're not a betrayer. You're a tactician. The real plan, Din said, is that I get aboard Gideon's ship and find a way to sabotage it from the inside. Imperial vessels have vulnerabilities. I've studied them, fought them. If I can reach the reactor controls or the hyperdrive remnants, I might be able to trigger a cascade failure. Not destroy the ship completely, but damage it enough that it can't fight. Suicide, Sisko said bluntly. Probably, Din agreed. But if it keeps Grogu safe and prevents a battle that would kill everyone on this station, it's worth it. There's another option, Sisko said. Let me tell you about something we tried during the Dominion War. An old Earth strategy called a Trojan horse. For the next 3 minutes, Sisko outlined a plan so audacious, so dependent on split-second timing and multiple variables aligning perfectly, that Din almost laughed. Almost. But looking at Sisko's face, seeing the absolute confidence there, he realized something. This man had faced impossible odds before and won. Had held this station against forces that should have overwhelmed him. Had earned his crew's loyalty through actions, not words. It could work, Din said slowly. It has to work, Sisko corrected. Because if it doesn't, we're all going to have a very bad day. Now you have about 2 minutes before Gideon's transporters lock onto you. Spend them with your son. Din turned to where Grogu was watching him with those enormous eyes. He crossed the room, took the child from Troy's arms, held him close. Grogu cooed softly, his small hands touching Din's helmet, the child's way of trying to sense what his protector was feeling. I know you're scared, Din whispered. I am too. But I need you to be brave for just a little longer. Can you do that? Grogu nodded, his ears drooping but his expression determined. When the fighting starts, and it will start, I need you to stay with Commander Sisko. He'll keep you safe. And kid, if something goes wrong, if I don't make it back. Din's voice caught, surprising him with the emotion that forced its way through. You stay here. You learn from these people. You grow up safe. Understand? Grogu made a distressed sound, shaking his head violently, not accepting the possibility of losing his protector. Hey, Din said gently. I'm not planning on dying today. But if it happens, I need to know you'll be okay. That you'll keep going. Promise me. The child touched his helmet again, and this time Din felt it, a warmth that shouldn't have been possible through Beskar and electronics, a sensation like the Force but adapted to this universe's rules. Grogu was reaching out, connecting with him on a level deeper than words. Not alone. Together. Always together. Din's throat tightened. Yeah, kid. Together. This is the way. A shimmer of light surrounded him, the Imperial transporter beam, different from Federation technology but achieving the same result. The last thing he saw before Ops dissolved was Grogu reaching for him, Sisko's hand on the child's shoulder, and the absolute determination on both their faces. Then he was aboard the Star Destroyer. The transport chamber was exactly as he remembered, harsh lighting, cold metal, stormtroopers flanking every entrance with weapons at ready. But what drew his attention was the throne-like chair at the room's center, and the man sitting in it. Moff Gideon stood, approaching Din with the confidence of someone who believed himself completely in control. Welcome aboard, Djarin. I trust you left the child behind as agreed? I did, Din confirmed, his hands carefully visible and empty of weapons. His armor's hidden systems were already scanning the ship, mapping layouts, identifying critical systems. Sisko's plan required precise information, and Din had maybe 5 minutes to gather it before things went kinetic. Excellent, Gideon said. Then let's discuss this wormhole of yours. I want detailed information, coordinates, Federation defensive positions, operational schedules. Everything you know. Din began talking. Spinning a story that mixed truth with fiction, providing just enough real information to seem credible, while carefully avoiding anything that would actually help Gideon. He talked about the wormhole's location, its unpredictable nature, the Bajoran religious significance that complicated Federation politics. He talked about the Dominion on the other side, painting them as potential allies for someone with sufficient ambition and firepower. And while he talked, his armor's sensors were working. Mapping power conduits. Identifying shield generators. Locating the ship's reactor core and the damaged hyperdrive that Gideon's crew was desperately trying to repair. Finding the one vulnerability that made Sisko's plan possible. Fascinating, Gideon said when Din finished. You've given me much to consider, Djarin. Of course, I'll need to verify this information before releasing you. Standard procedure, I'm sure you understand. I understand you're going to betray our agreement, Din replied calmly. You're going to lock me up, torture me for additional information, and then kill me once you've confirmed everything I've told you. After which you'll attack Deep Space Nine anyway, because you can't resist the opportunity to prove your superiority. Gideon's smile didn't waver. You know me so well. It's almost touching. Stormtroopers, secure the prisoner. And prepare a squadron of TIE fighters. We'll be paying Commander Sisko a visit shortly. The stormtroopers moved forward, neural batons raised to subdue Din without damaging the valuable information in his head. Din didn't resist. He let them grab his arms, start to drag him toward the detention levels. Then, exactly on schedule, every light on the Star Destroyer went dark. Not a power failure, a coordinated systems hack. Data and Chief O'Brien, working together from DS9, had spent the last 5 minutes infiltrating the Star Destroyer's computer systems using the scanning data Din's armor had transmitted. Federation technology meeting Imperial software, exploiting vulnerabilities that had never been patched because they'd never been exposed to this kind of attack. In the darkness, Din moved. His armor's night vision activated, painting the world in green and black. He spun, breaking the stormtrooper's grip with a twist that his training had made instinctive. His fist connected with the helmet, the impact enhanced by Besker's weight. The trooper went down. Emergency lighting flickered on, red and angry. Alarms screamed. And through the chaos, Din heard Gideon's voice, sharp with fury. "All hands, we have an intruder alert. Find Djarin and kill him. Forget taking him alive, he's more dangerous than anticipated." Din was already running, following the mental map his armor had constructed. The reactor core was 3 decks down, heavily guarded but accessible through maintenance conduits that stormtroopers in full armor couldn't easily navigate. If he could reach it, if he could trigger the overload sequence Sisko's engineers had identified. Blaster fire erupted behind him. He dove into a side corridor, returned fire with the weapons he never actually surrendered. Hidden in his armor's compartments, small enough to avoid casual inspection. Not his full arsenal, but enough. He made it to a maintenance hatch, dropped through to the deck below, kept moving. Behind him, he could hear stormtroopers coordinating, beginning to predict his movements. Gideon's voice over the ship's intercom, promising rewards for whoever brought him down. 2 decks down now. 1 more to go. But the corridor ahead was full of troopers, forming a firing line that would shred him the moment he emerged. No way through. Din triggered his jetpack, rocketing backward down the corridor he'd come from, then banking hard into a vertical shaft. Weapons fire followed him, phasing bolts against his armor, but Besker held. He dropped through the shaft, fired his grappling line to slow his descent, crashed through into the reactor level with enough force to crack deck plating, and found himself facing a massive chamber dominated by the ship's power core, a sphere of contained fusion that pulsed with deadly energy. Catwalks surrounded it. Control stations monitored its output. And standing between Din and the access console was Gideon himself, holding a weapon Din recognized with a start of recognition. The Darksaber. The ancient Mandalorian weapon that Din had won in combat, that he'd carried until circumstances forced him to set it aside. Gideon must have kept it after their last encounter, must have brought it through the dimensional rift as a trophy. "Ironic," Gideon said, activating the blade. It hummed to life, black energy that drank light, ancient technology that predated the Empire by millennia. "I lose this weapon to you, you lose it to circumstances, and now I reclaim it to kill you." There's a certain poetry to that, don't you think? "There's nothing poetic about you," Din replied, drawing the only weapon he had left that could match a Darksaber, his Besker spear, collapsed and hidden in his armor until this moment. He extended it with a sharp motion, the pure Besker gleaming even in the reactor's ominous light. They circled each other on the catwalk, 2 warriors with vastly different philosophies but identical understanding. This ended with one of them dead. Gideon struck first, the Darksaber cleaving through the air with a sound like tearing reality. Din parried with the spear, Besker meeting ancient energy in a shower of sparks. The impact sent vibrations up his arms, but he'd trained for this. Knew how to fight opponents with energy weapons. They traded blows across the catwalk, either giving ground. Gideon was skilled, better than Din had anticipated, trained by someone who understood Form 4 lightsaber combat. But Din was Mandalorian. He'd fought Jedi, fought dark side users, fought opponents who relied on the Force as a crutch. And Gideon was just a man with an ancient weapon. No force, no enhanced reflexes, just ambition and skill. Din found an opening. Ducked under a horizontal slash, drove the spear's butt end into Gideon's knee. The Moff stumbled, his guard dropping for a fraction of a second. Din didn't waste it. He spun, brought the spear around in an arc that would have taken Gideon's head off if the Moff hadn't rolled away at the last instant. But the roll put Gideon next to the catwalk's railing. Din charged, shoulder-checking the Moff hard enough to send him over the edge. Gideon caught himself with one hand, the Darksaber dropping from his grip, clattering down into the reactor chamber's lower levels. Din looked down at the man who'd hunted Grogu, who'd caused so much pain and suffering in pursuit of power. It would be so easy to let go, to let him fall. But that wasn't the way. Mandalorians were warriors, not murderers. Din reached down, grabbed Gideon's hand, began pulling him up. And the Moff's other hand came up holding a hold-out blaster. The shot caught Din square in the chest. The Beskar held, but the impact sent him staggering backward. Gideon used the moment to haul himself up, diving for the fallen darksaber. Din's vision was blurred from the impact, his chest screaming with pain even through the armor. He saw Gideon raise the darksaber for a killing blow, saw the ancient weapon descending toward his neck. And then Gideon jerked, his eyes wide with surprise. The darksaber fell from nerveless fingers. He looked down to see a spear of pure energy protruding from his chest, a phaser beam, tightly focused, fired from the chamber's entrance. Grogu stood there, his small hands extended, his eyes glowing with psionic energy. Behind him was Sisko, phaser rifle still raised, and a security team. The child had led them here through some combination of their training together and pure desperate need to protect his father. Gideon fell, his expression frozen in disbelief. And as he hit the deck, the ship shuddered. Not from weapons fire, but from internal systems cascading into failure. Data's hack was complete. The reactor was overloading, and nothing could stop it now. "Time to go!" Sisko shouted, grabbing Din and hauling him toward the exit. Grogu leaped into Din's arms, his small hands clutching desperately at Beskar armor. They ran through corridors filled with panicking stormtroopers, reached a transport junction where Odo had managed to hack open a direct line to DS9's transporters. The beam took them just as the Star Destroyer's reactor breached. They materialized in ops to see the viewscreen showing an expanding sphere of plasma where the Imperial ship had been. Debris scattered across space, some pieces already burning up as they hit the station's shields. Of the 2,000 stormtroopers, 40 TIE fighters, and one very ambitious Moff, nothing remained but rapidly dispersing atoms. Din sank to his knees, Grogu still held tight against his chest. The child was crying, relief, exhaustion, the trauma of everything they just survived. "You're okay," Din whispered. "We're okay. It's over." "Is it?" Sisko asked quietly, crouching beside them. "More might come through that rift. More Imperials, more threats from your galaxy. Then we'll face them," Din replied. "Together. This is the way." And for the first time since crossing dimensions, he truly believed it. The debris field that had been an Imperial Star Destroyer continued to dissipate over the following days, particles scattering into the void or burning up against Deep Space Nine's shields. Chief O'Brien's engineering teams worked around the clock analyzing the wreckage, cataloging technology that shouldn't exist in their universe, trying to understand propulsion systems and weapons that operated on entirely different physical principles. Data spent 72 hours in the science labs, barely pausing for the maintenance cycles his positronic brain required, fascinated by what he called a Rosetta Stone for understanding alternate dimensional physics. He theorized that the rift which had brought both Din and Gideon through might be stabilizing rather than closing, a permanent bridge between universes, though where exactly it led and whether it could be traversed safely remained unknown. For Din Djarin, those days were strange and quiet. No immediate threats. No bounty hunters materializing from the shadows. No Imperial remnants dropping out of hyperspace with weapons hot. Just peace. The kind of peace he'd almost forgotten existed. He spent mornings with Grogu in what had become their routine, training sessions with Counselor Troy and Trull, the child's abilities growing stronger each day. Grogu could now maintain a psionic shield for hours without exhaustion, could levitate objects the size of a person, could sense emotions and intentions across the entire promenade. The Force hadn't returned, not as it had been, but something new had emerged. Something that belonged to this universe while still being uniquely Grogu's. Afternoons, Din joined the Klingon at Quark's bar. They'd adopted him as an honorary warrior after the battle with Gideon, insisting he share blood wine and war stories. Din had quietly explained that Mandalorians didn't remove their helmets in public, and the Klingon had respected that, even found it admirably honorable. They taught him drinking songs he couldn't sing and battle tactics he filed away for future reference. In return, he taught them Mandalorian hand-to-hand techniques, showing them how to turn Beskar armor into a weapon itself. Evenings belonged to Grogu alone. They would sit in their quarters, watching the wormhole pulse with impossible colors through the viewport, and Din would tell the child stories about Mandalore. About the creed, the way, the legends of warriors who'd fought Jedi and Sith, who'd carved out a place in the galaxy through pure determination. He told Grogu about the Armorer, about Paz Vizsla and the Covert on Navarro, about Bo-Katan and her quest to reclaim their homeworld. Stories of a place and people they might never see again. It was during one of these evenings that Captain Picard requested a meeting. He arrived at their quarters with Commander Sisko, both men carrying the weight of news they weren't sure how to deliver. "Mr. Djarin," Picard began after accepting the offered seat, "we've completed our analysis of the dimensional rift. Data believes he's found a way to stabilize it, to create a controlled passage back to your universe." Din felt his heart skip. Home. The possibility of going home, of returning Grogu to a galaxy where the Force existed properly, where Mandalorians still walked, where everything made sense according to rules he understood. "There's a complication," Sisko added, his tone cautious. "The rift is unstable by nature. Opening it deliberately, holding it long enough for a ship to pass through, would require massive energy expenditure. The station's reactors combined with the Defiance warp core might be enough. But doing so would likely collapse the rift permanently afterward," Picard finished. "You would have one chance. One opportunity to return home. And once you crossed, there would be no coming back. Ever." The words hung in the air like a weapon suspended between them. Din looked at Grogu, who was watching the conversation with an understanding that went beyond his years. The child knew what was being offered. Knew what it meant. "When?" Din asked quietly. "We could have the procedure ready in 3 days," Sisko said. "That gives you time to prepare, to decide if this is what you want. Mr. Djarin, I want to be clear, you're under no obligation to leave. You've proven yourself here. Fought beside us, bled for this station. If you wanted to stay, to make a life in the Federation, you'd be welcome. We could arrange Starfleet training, assign you to DS9's security force permanently. The child would be protected, educated, given every opportunity to master his abilities. You've become part of the community here," Picard added gently. "The crew respects you. The Klingon consider you a brother in arms. Even Quark has stopped trying to cheat you, which in Ferengi terms means you're practically family. You have a place here, Mr. Djarin. A home, if you want it." Din stood, walked to the viewport, stared out at the wormhole. 3 days. 72 hours to decide between 2 universes, 2 possible futures. In one direction lay everything familiar. The galaxy he'd been born in, the Mandalorians who were his people, the possibility of finding other Force-sensitive children like Grogu, of completing the quest that had defined the last years of his life. But it also meant returning to Imperial remnants, to bounty hunters, to constant vigilance, and the knowledge that Grogu would always be hunted. In the other direction lay the unknown. A universe with different rules, strange allies, technology he barely understood. But also safety. A station defended by warriors who understood honor, protected by organizations that actually meant it when they said they'd help. A place where Grogu could grow up without fear, could master abilities that here were seen as gifts rather than weapons to be exploited. "I need to think," Din said finally. "Can I have those 3 days?" "Of course," Picard said, standing. "Mr. Djarin, whatever you decide, know that it's been an honor. You've reminded us that courage and honor exist in every universe, in every species. That's not something we take lightly." After they left, Din sat with Grogu for a long time in silence. Finally, the child climbed into his lap, looked up at the helmet that hid his protector's face, and cooed questioningly. "I don't know, kid," Din admitted. "I really don't know." The next 3 days were a blur of conversations and considerations. Major Kira argued that staying made tactical sense. The Federation needed warriors who understood threats from other dimensions. Data presented probability calculations suggesting Grogu's long-term development would benefit from exposure to multiple psionic traditions. Dr. Crusher offered to establish a comprehensive medical baseline for Grogu's species, potentially discovering ways to extend his training far beyond what any single Jedi could provide. The Klingon threw Din a feast and got spectacularly drunk, singing songs about glorious battles and eternal brotherhood. Quark tried to convince him that staying meant business opportunities. Think of the profit potential. Mandalorian Security Consulting. I could franchise it. Before Odo threw him out of his own bar. Even Q appeared, the omnipotent being materializing in Din's quarters with his characteristic flash and ego. Leaving so soon? Q asked, examining Grogu with disconcerting interest. Just when things were getting interesting. I was hoping to see what happened when a Force user encountered the Borg. Or the Founders. Or me, for that matter. But if you want to scurry back to your little corner of the multiverse. Din had drawn his blaster on instinct, which made Q laugh. Oh, I like you, Q said. Such delightful hostility. Very well, Mandalorian, here's some unsolicited advice from a being who's seen more universes than you can conceptualize. Home isn't where you come from. It's where you choose to be. The real question is whether you're brave enough to choose differently than you planned. Then he vanished, leaving Din alone with questions that wouldn't stop multiplying. On the morning of the third day, Din made his decision. He found Commander Sisko in Ops, reviewing final preparations for the rift opening. The commander looked up as Din approached, Grogu perched on his shoulder as always, and seemed to read the answer in the Mandalorian's posture. You're leaving, Sisko said. Not a question. I have to, Din replied. There are Mandalorians in my galaxy who need to know the covert survived, who need to understand what happened to us. There are people who helped me, who risked everything to protect Grogu. I can't abandon them. It wouldn't be the way. I understand, Sisko said, though his expression suggested disappointment. When do you want to make the attempt? No, Din said. Before I change my mind. Before I start thinking about all the reasons staying makes more sense. Sisko nodded, tapping his comm badge. All senior staff to Ops. We're opening the rift. 20 minutes later, Din stood in the docking bay beside his ship, surrounded by people who'd become something like friends in the brief time he'd known them. Picard was there, Data beside him analyzing last-minute variables. Kira and Odo, representing DS9's command structure. Dr. Crusher and Counselor Troy, who'd helped Grogu adapt to a universe that hadn't been ready for him. Even Worf, standing at attention with the kind of respectful acknowledgement one warrior gave another. We've programmed your ship's computer with the vector you'll need to follow, Data explained, handing Din a data chip that his ship's systems could somehow interface with despite incompatible technology, another impossibility made possible by Data's genius. The rift will remain open for approximately 47 seconds. You'll need to achieve specific velocity and trajectory to avoid the dimensional shear that could destroy your ship. The margin for error is minimal. Understood, Din said, taking the chip. Mr. Djarin, Picard said formally, extending his hand. It's been an honor. If circumstances were different, I would have been proud to serve beside you. Live long and prosper. Din shook his hand, the gesture automatic now. Thank you for everything, Captain. For protecting us when you didn't have to. For fighting beside us. For showing me that not every government is corrupt, not every organization exists to exploit people. He turned to Sisko. Commander. This station, your crew, you've given us something I didn't think existed anymore. Safety. Community. A place to breathe. I won't forget that. Neither will we, Sisko replied. You've left your mark here, Din Djarin. Changed how we think about honor, about what it means to protect someone at any cost. That matters. Grogu was making distressed sounds now, his ears flat against his head. The child understood they were leaving, understood what that meant. He reached toward Counselor Troy, toward Dr. Crusher, toward the people who'd helped him learn to use his abilities in a universe that operated by different rules. "I know, kid," Din murmured, pulling Grogu close. "But we have to go home. We have to try." He boarded his ship, strapped Grogu into the seat beside him, began pre-flight sequences that had become muscle memory. Through the viewport, he watched the docking bay's massive doors opening, revealing space beyond. And beyond that, visible through the void, the wormhole pulsed with colors that hurt to see, a reminder of forces beyond mortal comprehension. "Deep Space Nine to Mandalorian vessel." Sisko's voice came through the calm. "We're ready to initiate the rift opening on your mark." Din's hands hovered over the controls. One word, and they'd begin the process. One decision, and everything would change. Again. He looked at Grogu. The child looked back with those enormous eyes, trusting, always trusting that Din would make the right choice. "Do it," Din said. Space tore open. Not gradually, not with warning. One moment there was nothing but starfield and the distant glow of the wormhole. The next, reality was screaming, colors bleeding through dimensions, geometries that existed in impossible configurations burning themselves across the viewport. The rift was smaller than the one that had brought them here. More controlled, more focused, but also more violent. Din engaged his engines, following the vector data had calculated, racing toward the wound in space-time. His sensors were screaming warnings about dimensional shear, about energy patterns that would tear the ship apart if he deviated even slightly from the planned trajectory. Behind him, DS9 was pouring every available joule of power into keeping the rift open. The station's lights dimmed, life support dropping to minimum, every reactor pushed beyond safe limits. 47 seconds, data had said. Already 10 had passed. Din dove into the rift. Reality broke. For subjective eternity, seconds that felt like hours, Din existed everywhere and nowhere. He saw his own ship from outside and inside simultaneously. Felt Grogu's presence beside him while also sensing the child was light years away. Perceived Deep Space Nine holding vigil in one dimension while Mandalore burned in another, while 1,000 other possible realities played out in infinite variation. Then, with a lurch that nearly tore his consciousness apart, they were through. Stars. Normal stars, in configurations Din recognized. The sensors painted familiar territory, the outer rim, near enough to known space that he could plot a course home. His home. The galaxy he'd been born in. He'd made it. They'd made it. Din allowed himself 3 seconds to process that impossibility, then began calculating the jump to hyperspace. Behind them, the rift was already collapsing, the bridge between universes sealing itself. No going back. Ever. Grogu made a small, sad sound. Din looked over and saw tears in those enormous eyes, not for what they'd lost, but for who they'd left behind. "I know, kid," Din said softly. "I'm going to miss them too." He engaged the hyperdrive. The ship jumped, and the stars stretched into familiar lines of light. They were home. They were safe. They were together. And somewhere, in a universe they'd never see again, a station full of warriors and scientists and misfits raised a toast to the Mandalorian and his child, to the strangers who'd reminded them what honor truly meant. 2 months later, Din Djarin stood before the armorer in a hidden covert, recounting everything that had happened. The dimensional rift, the Federation, the battles fought and allies found. The choice to return despite being offered safety, community, a place where Grogu could grow up without fear. The armorer listened without interruption, her hammer silent for once. When Din finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You had a choice," she finally said. "Between 2 paths, 2 possible futures. You chose the harder road, the one that required abandoning safety for duty. This is the way. This is the way," Din repeated. "But the child?" The armorer continued, her helmet turning toward where Grogu sat, playing with a small piece of Beskar. "His abilities have changed. He is no longer purely force-sensitive. He carries something from that other universe, does he not? Din nodded. He can still do everything he did before, but it works differently now. Counselor Troy said he was bridging two different systems, force and psionic abilities. He's something new. Something that might not have existed before. Something unique, the armorer said. A child of two universes. That makes him more valuable than ever, Din Djarin. And more vulnerable. You understand this? I do, Din said. But we'll face it. We've survived worse. The armorer nodded slowly. Then continue his training. Teach him the way. Help him master these hybrid abilities. And know that whatever comes, you have honored the creed. You protected a foundling at great cost to yourself. That is what Mandalorians do. Din left the covert with Grogu, returning to his ship. As they lifted off, heading back into the wider galaxy, he allowed himself to wonder, just for a moment, what Picard and Sisko were doing. Whether Data had solved the mysteries of dimensional physics. Whether the Klingon were still drinking and singing about glorious battle. Whether, somewhere across the impossible gulf between universes, people he'd come to respect remembered him the way he remembered them. You thinking about them? Din asked Grogu. The child cooed affirmatively, his ears drooping with melancholy. Me too, kid, Din said quietly. But we made our choice. We chose the way. We chose duty. That's what matters. Grogu reached up, touched Din's helmet with one small hand. And through whatever strange hybrid of force and psionics the child now commanded, Din felt a pulse of understanding, of acceptance. They'd found a home in another universe. But they'd chosen to return to the one where they belonged, where their duty lay, where other Mandalorians needed to know the covert still existed. This was the way. It had always been the way. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, Din wondered about roads not taken and universes left unexplored, well, that was between him and Grogu, and no one else needed to know. They jumped to hyperspace, the stars blurring into lines of light, and disappeared into the familiar chaos of their own galaxy. Home. At last. The dimensional rift that brought Din Djarin and Grogu to the Star Trek universe changed them both in ways that would echo through their lives. Grogu's abilities evolved, carrying echoes of Beta's empathy and Vulcan mental discipline woven into Force techniques. He became something unprecedented, a bridge between two systems of power, proof that reality could accommodate more than one truth. Din returned to Mandalore with stories that most dismissed as fever dreams or elaborate metaphors. But those who listened closely heard something real in his words, accounts of warriors who fought for ideals rather than profit, of ships that explored rather than conquered, of a federation built on principles the Mandalorian way could respect even if it could never fully join. The Federation never forgot them either. Data compiled extensive files on dimensional physics, laying groundwork for future explorations. Sisko referenced the Mandalorian in classified reports about unconventional allies. Picard occasionally wondered if they'd made the right choice, letting them go, knowing they returned to a galaxy still hunted by remnants of a fallen empire. But both understood, home isn't where you're safe. Home is where you're needed. Where your duty lies. Where your people wait for the knowledge that someone survived, someone endured, someone carried the way forward. In the years that followed, Din would face threats that made Section 31 and Romulan warbids seem manageable by comparison. Grogu would grow, would learn, would eventually become something the galaxy had never seen, a Mandalorian trained in arts that transcended a single universe's rules. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the stars seemed especially distant, Din would remember a station where people had defended him without hesitation, where honor meant something concrete rather than theoretical, where he'd glimpsed what civilization could be when it actually lived up to its ideals. Two universes, forever separated by dimensional barriers no technology could breach. Two warriors, shaped by experiences in both. One truth they carried forward. That honor, courage, and the will to protect the innocent transcended physics, dimensions, and the boundaries between realities. This was the way. In every universe. In every possibility. And that, ultimately, was enough. Live long and prosper. Hit that subscribe button for more interesting stories.